The fluorescent lights of the Broadway subway station flickered against the cream-colored tiles, casting an uneven glow across the platform where hundreds of commuters shuffled through their Monday morning routines. November in Nashville carried a particular kind of cold, not the biting freeze of northern states, but a damp chill that seeped through layers of clothing and settled into bones. Outside, the temperature hovered around 42 degrees, and a light drizzle had been falling since dawn, turning the city's streets into reflective mirrors of neon signs and traffic lights. Tyler Bennett positioned himself in his usual spot near the entrance to Platform B, right where the corridor widened before splitting toward the north and southbound trains. At 28 years old, he carried the weathered look of someone who had seen both sides of fortune. His fingers, calloused from years of playing, moved across the strings of his worn Martin guitar with practiced precision. The instrument itself told a story. Scratches along its body, a repaired crack near the sound hole, and faded stickers from venues he had played years ago when hope burned brighter than reality. He wore a faded denim jacket over a gray hoodie, both insufficient against the cold that crept up from the concrete floor. His dark brown hair, slightly too long and tucked behind his ears, framed a face that held both determination and exhaustion. A small amplifier, powered by a portable battery pack, sat beside his open guitar case, where a few dollar bills and scattered coins represented the morning's modest earnings. Barely $12 after 2 hours of playing. Tyler's fingers found the opening chords of an original composition, a melancholic melody he had written during his final year of medical school. That seemed like another lifetime now. 4 years at Vanderbilt University studying medicine, following in his father's footsteps, attending lectures on anatomy and pharmacology, while his guitar gathered dust in his dorm room closet. The memory of his father's face when he announced he was leaving medical school still haunted him. The disappointment, the anger, the bewildered question, "You're throwing away everything we worked for to play guitar in bars?" That had been 3 years ago. 3 years of playing dive bars, coffee shops, and subway stations. 3 years of watching his savings dwindle while recording costs, equipment repairs, and basic living expenses consumed every dollar. 3 years of his mother's worried phone calls and his younger sister's gentle suggestions to maybe have a backup plan. 3 years of wondering if his father had been right all along. The morning crowd flowed around him like water around a stone. Some paused briefly, others didn't even glance his way. A middle-aged woman in a business suit dropped $1 in his case without breaking stride. A teenager with headphones walked past, completely absorbed in his phone. This was the reality of being a street musician in Nashville, a city where talent was as common as autumn leaves, and dreams came with expiration dates. 20 feet away, Jessica Browning was setting up her violin near the ticket machines. At 32, she carried herself with the refined posture of someone trained in classical music, though her current circumstances bore no resemblance to the concert halls where she once imagined performing. Her violin, a beautiful instrument her grandmother had given her for her 18th birthday, gleamed under the station lights. She wore a long burgundy coat over black pants and practical boots, her blonde hair pulled back in a neat ponytail that revealed delicate silver earrings, a small gesture of maintaining dignity in undignified circumstances. Jessica had been a music teacher at Hamilton Middle School for 6 years, nurturing young talents and building one of the best school orchestras in Davidson County. Then came the budget cuts. First, they reduced the program from 5 days a week to 3. Then, they cut funding for instruments and sheet music. Finally, last April, they eliminated the entire music department. 23 years of teaching experience across 2 schools, gone in a single board meeting that lasted less than 40 minutes. She had spent the summer applying to every school within a 50-mile radius. The responses were all variations of the same theme. We appreciate your interest, but we currently have no openings in our music department. Some districts had eliminated music programs entirely. Others had one teacher covering multiple schools. By September, with her savings running dangerously low and rent due, she had swallowed her pride and brought her violin to the subway. The first day had been the hardest. She had stood frozen for 20 minutes, violin case open but unable to lift her bow. A construction worker had finally dropped a $5 bill in her case and said, "You gonna play something? Or are we just looking at it?" That had broken the spell. Now, 6 weeks later, she could open her case and begin playing without the crushing weight of shame that had initially paralyzed her. Jessica rosined her bow and began with Vivaldi's Winter from the Four Seasons. The piece felt appropriate for the dreary morning, and she knew from experience that classical music attracted a different kind of attention in subway stations. Some people stopped because they recognized quality. Others paused because the music seemed incongruous with the setting, like finding a rare orchid growing through sidewalk concrete. The third member of this unofficial trio was Daniel Hayes, who had claimed his territory near the far end of the platform where the tunnel opened toward the southbound tracks. At 24, Daniel represented a different kind of musical journey. He had never had formal training, never owned a proper drum set, never played in a school band. He learned rhythm from his father, a jazz enthusiast who played records every Sunday morning. Miles Davis, John Coltrane, Buddy Rich, filling their small apartment with sounds that transcended their circumstances. Daniel's drum kit consisted of 5 white plastic buckets of varying sizes, 2 overturned paint cans, and a wooden crate that served as his bass drum. He used wooden dowels wrapped in electrical tape as drumsticks, and a cymbal he had purchased from a pawn shop for $15 completed his setup. Despite the makeshift nature of his instruments, Daniel could create rhythms that made people stop and stare. His hands moved with blinding speed, creating complex polyrhythms that echoed through the station tunnels like thunder. He wore a black leather jacket that had seen better days, ripped jeans, and construction boots. The same boots he wore to his night job as a warehouse loader at Amazon's fulfillment center on the edge of town. His shift ended at 6 in the morning, and he came directly to the subway station for the morning rush, too wired from work and energy drinks to sleep. The music was his release, his meditation, his way of processing the monotony of scanning packages and loading trucks for 8 hours. Daniel's mother, Patricia Hayes, was the reason he pushed himself so hard. She had been diagnosed with multiple sclerosis 3 years ago, and her condition had progressively worsened. The medications were expensive, even with insurance. Physical therapy sessions cost $200 weekly. Someone needed to drive her to appointments, help with grocery shopping, ensure she took her medications on time. Daniel's father had left when he was 12, disappearing like smoke after the financial pressures became too much. There were no other siblings, no extended family nearby. It was just Daniel and his mother against the world. The 3 musicians had developed an unspoken understanding over the weeks they had been playing in the same station. They positioned themselves far enough apart not to interfere with each other's sound, but close enough to acknowledge each other's presence. Sometimes, during quieter moments between trains, their music would blend accidentally. Tyler's guitar chords aligning with Jessica's violin melody, Daniel's rhythms providing an unexpected foundation. These moments never lasted long, but they hinted at something larger, some potential collaboration that none of them had the time or energy to pursue. By 9:30, the morning rush was beginning to thin. Tyler counted the bills in his guitar case, $28. Enough for lunch, and maybe dinner if he was careful. Not enough for the recording studio time he desperately needed. Not enough to pay his share of rent in the cramped apartment he shared with 2 other musicians. Not enough to prove to his family that he had made the right choice. Jessica's violin case held slightly more, $34 and some change. Better than some days, worse than others. She tried not to think about the stack of unpaid bills on her kitchen counter, the credit card statement she was afraid to open, the medical debt from a root canal she could no longer ignore. She tried to focus on the music, on the muscle memory of pieces she had practiced for decades, on the brief moments when someone actually stopped to listen. Daniel had collected $42, his best Monday morning in weeks. He allowed himself a moment of relief. That would cover his mother's medication copay at the pharmacy. He could pick it up during his break before his afternoon session. Maybe he could even grab her favorite soup from the deli on Morrison Street, the one with the homemade chicken noodle that always made her smile. The station had fallen into its mid-morning lull when the commotion started near the entrance. A group of 6 people, 3 women and 3 men, all appearing to be in their 50s and 60s, had gathered near the top of the stairs leading down to the platform. They were dressed in typical tourist attire, comfortable walking shoes, light jackets, cameras hanging from necks, and that particular energy of people on vacation. "Oh my God, is that really him?" one of the women said, her voice carrying across the platform with that distinctive Texas drawl. "I think it is," another responded, pulling out her phone. "In Nashville, of all places. Jim, get over here with the camera." Tyler glanced up from his guitar, curious but not particularly interested. Celebrity sightings were common enough in Nashville. The city drew musicians, actors, and entertainers constantly. He had seen Keith Urban at a coffee shop once, Taylor Swift at a bookstore years ago, and countless others at venues around town. In Nashville, famous people were part of the landscape. But this felt different. The group wasn't just excited. They were emotional. One of the women had tears in her eyes as she stared at someone descending the stairs. Tyler craned his neck to see past the morning commuters, but couldn't identify the source of their attention. Jessica had noticed the commotion, too. She paused her playing, bow suspended above the strings, watching as the group began to sing. Their voices, untrained but heartfelt, rose above the ambient noise of the subway station. "Amarillo by Morning, up from San Antone." Tyler's hands froze on his guitar strings. He knew that song. Every musician in Nashville knew that song. It was a classic, a George Strait hit that had defined an era of country music. "Everything that I got is just what I've got on." More commuters had stopped now, some recognizing the song, others simply curious about the impromptu performance. The group sang with genuine emotion, their voices blending in rough harmony, tourists transformed into a choir by their shared love of music. "When that sun is high in that Texas sky, I'll be bucking at the county fair." And then Tyler saw him, descending the stairs with the quiet confidence of someone who had learned to navigate public spaces despite fame, dressed in simple jeans, a white button-down shirt, and a black jacket, was George Strait, the king of country himself, looking exactly as he did in photographs, but somehow more present, more real. He wore a black cowboy hat pulled low, and his expression suggested he had been hoping to pass through unnoticed. The singing group had positioned themselves at the bottom of the stairs, completing their impromptu tribute. "Amarillo by Morning. Amarillo, I'll be there." George Strait stopped. For a moment, Tyler thought he might simply smile politely and continue walking, the practiced response of someone who had dealt with public recognition for decades. Instead, George removed his hat, held it against his chest, and nodded to the group with genuine appreciation. "That was beautiful," he said, his voice carrying that familiar warmth that had made him beloved by millions. "Y'all from Texas?" "San Antonio!" one of the women exclaimed, her voice breaking with emotion. "We've been fans since 1981. Saw you at the rodeo 16 times. 17, her husband corrected gently. Don't forget the anniversary concert. George smiled, the kind of smile that transformed his face from handsome to genuinely warm. 17 times. Well, I hope I didn't disappoint on any of those occasions. Never, the woman said firmly. Not once. Your music. It got us through some hard times. My husband's deployment. When we lost our son. When the ranch almost went under. Your songs were always there. The moment hung in the air, heavy with unspoken stories and shared human experience. This wasn't about fame or celebrity anymore. This was about connection, about how art reaches across distances and circumstances to touch people in their most vulnerable moments. George stepped forward and embraced the woman gently. Thank you for sharing that with me, he said quietly. I'm sorry about your son. Tyler felt his throat tighten. He had been so focused on his own struggles, his own disappointments, that he had forgotten why he had chosen music in the first place. It wasn't about record deals or sold-out venues. It was about this, these moments of genuine human connection. The group took photos with George, their faces glowing with joy. Other commuters had gathered now, some recognizing the country legend. Others simply caught up in the warmth of the moment. George was gracious with everyone, shaking hands, signing autographs on whatever paper people could produce. Subway tickets, receipts, the margin of a newspaper. But then something shifted. George's attention moved away from the group surrounding him. Tyler watched as the singer's gaze traveled across the platform, settling first on Jessica with her violin, then on him with his guitar, and finally on Daniel with his makeshift drum kit. George's expression changed, revealing something that looked like recognition, not of faces, but of a familiar struggle. George excused himself from the group of fans and began walking toward Tyler. Each step felt surreal, like watching a figure from a poster step out of the frame and into three-dimensional reality. Tyler's mind raced. Should he stand up? Keep playing? Say something? George stopped a few feet away and listened. Tyler had resumed playing without consciously deciding to do so, his fingers finding the chords to one of his original songs, a piece about leaving home and the cost of chasing dreams. The lyrics spoke of highways stretching toward horizons that never seemed to get closer, of phone calls home that grew further apart, of wondering if courage and foolishness were just two names for the same thing. When Tyler finished, George nodded slowly. "That's a good song," he said simply. "You write it?" "Yes, sir," Tyler managed, his voice steadier than he expected. "Wrote it about 3 years ago." "It shows maturity beyond 3 years," George observed. "You've been playing longer than that." "Since I was 12. But seriously, I mean professionally." Tyler hesitated over the word professionally. What did that even mean? Seriously, for about 3 years. George glanced at the meager collection of bills in Tyler's guitar case. "How's that working out for you?" Tyler laughed, a short, honest sound. "Some days better than others. Today's a middle-of-the-road kind of day." "I remember those days," George said, and something in his voice made it clear he wasn't just being polite. "Played a lot of bars in Texas, where the pay was $50 and free drinks. Spent years wondering if I was wasting my time." "What kept you going?" Tyler asked before he could stop himself. George considered the question seriously. "Partly stubbornness, partly because I didn't know what else I would do, but mostly because on the hard days, there'd be one moment, one person who really listened, one song that came out exactly right, and that would be enough to carry me through another week." He turned toward Jessica, who had stopped playing and was watching the interaction with barely concealed hope. George walked over to her position near the ticket machines. "That was Vivaldi," he said. Winter. Jessica's eyes widened slightly, clearly not expecting a country music legend to recognize classical pieces. You know the Four Seasons? My wife got me into classical music years ago, George explained. She insisted that good music is good music, regardless of genre. Took me a while to understand what she meant, but she was right. He gestured toward her violin. That's a beautiful instrument. Thank you, Jessica said softly. It was my grandmother's. She was a concert violinist in Budapest before she immigrated. And now you're playing in subway stations, George observed, not unkindly. Jessica's composure cracked slightly. I was a music teacher. Budget cuts. I've been trying to find another position, but... She trailed off, unwilling to voice the full extent of her situation to a stranger, even one as famous as George Strait. But in the meantime, you're here keeping your skills sharp and sharing your gift with people who need beauty in their morning commute. George finished for her. That's not something to apologize for. That takes courage. Tears welled in Jessica's eyes. She blinked them back quickly, but not before George noticed. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a card, handing it to her. That's my manager's information. Send him a recording of you playing. No promises, but we're always looking for talented musicians for studio work. Backing tracks, things like that. Jessica took the card with trembling hands. I don't know what to say. Don't say anything yet, George said with a slight smile. Send the recording first. Then we'll see what there is to say. He moved toward Daniel's position at the far end of the platform. The young drummer had continued playing throughout George's interactions with the others, maintaining a steady rhythm that provided an unconscious soundtrack to the entire scene. Daniel's hands moved with practiced precision across his collection of buckets and cans, creating rhythms that would have been impressive on a professional kit, much less makeshift equipment. George stood watching for a full minute before Daniel noticed him. When he finally looked up, his hands faltered for the first time that morning. Don't stop, George said. That was just getting interesting. Daniel resumed playing, though his rhythm had become slightly self-conscious. George listened until the piece concluded, then said, You ever play on real drums? Not really, Daniel admitted. Messed around on a friend's kit a few times in high school. Mostly taught myself on whatever I could find. And you can create that complexity with buckets, George said, shaking his head in wonder. Son, you've got natural talent. What's stopping you from pursuing this seriously? Daniel's expression hardened slightly. Life's stopping me. I work nights at Amazon, play here in the mornings for extra money. My mother's sick, MS. And between her medical bills and basic expenses, there's no money for drum lessons or proper equipment or any of that. That's a heavy load for someone your age, George observed. It's the load I've got, Daniel said simply. I don't complain about it. I just carry it. George pulled out another business card, identical to the one he had given Jessica. Same deal. My manager's information. Send him a video of you playing. We do a lot of recording work in Nashville. Always need session drummers. Pays decent, and it's flexible enough you could keep your other job if you needed to. Daniel stared at the card like it might disappear if he blinked. Why would you do this? You don't know us? You don't owe us anything. You're right, I don't, George agreed. But someone did this for me once, back when I was playing honky-tonks in Texas and wondering if I'd ever make it past the state line. A producer named Irv Woolsey heard me at a club and decided to take a chance. Changed my whole life. I figure I owe it to keep that cycle going. He turned back toward the center of the platform where Tyler and Jessica had moved closer, drawn by curiosity and hope. The small group of Texas fans remained near the stairs, watching the interaction with interest but respectfully keeping their distance. "I want to try something," George announced, looking at all three musicians. "Would you mind playing something together?" "Whatever feels right." Tyler, Jessica, and Daniel exchanged glances. They had never actually played together, despite weeks of occupying the same station. But something in George's request, and perhaps in the surreal nature of the entire morning, made saying no impossible. Tyler moved his guitar and small amplifier closer to the center. Jessica brought her violin. Daniel grabbed two of his buckets and his homemade drumsticks. They formed a rough triangle, standing about 6 feet apart. "What should we play?" Jessica asked. "Something everyone knows," Tyler suggested. "Something simple we can build on." "How about Amazing Grace?" Daniel offered. "Everyone knows it, and it works with any instrument." They looked at each other, nodded, and began. Tyler started with the melody on guitar, his fingers finding the familiar notes. Jessica came in after 4 bars, her violin adding harmony that transformed the simple tune into something more complex. Daniel waited, listening, feeling the rhythm, then added a gentle pulse with his hands on the buckets. Not overwhelming, just providing foundation. The commuters on the platform stopped moving. The handful of people waiting for trains turned toward the music. The group of Texas fans stood transfixed. And George Strait, the king of country, stood with his arms crossed and a smile on his face, watching 3 struggling musicians create something beautiful from nothing. They played through the hymn once, then twice. On the 3rd repetition, they began to improvise. Tyler added embellishments to the melody. Jessica's violin soared into higher registers, creating counter-melodies that wove around the main theme. Daniel's rhythm became more complex, adding syncopation and fills that gave the piece unexpected energy. They had never rehearsed together. They had never even spoken before this morning beyond brief nods of acknowledgement. But in that moment, in that subway station under the streets of Nashville, they found something that can't be taught or manufactured. Musical chemistry, that mysterious alchemy that transforms individual talents into something greater than the sum of its parts. When they finished, the platform erupted in applause. The sound echoed off the tile walls, magnified by the confined space. Tyler's guitar case, which had held $28 when the morning started, was now filled with bills. People had walked up during the performance and contributed generously. Jessica's violin case overflowed with money. Even Daniel's upturned bucket beside his makeshift kit was stuffed with cash. But none of them were looking at the money. They were looking at each other, recognition dawning in their faces. They had just experienced something rare and precious, the moment when separate individuals become a band. George stepped forward, still clapping. "That," he said firmly, "is exactly what I'm talking about. You 3 have something special. The question is, what are you going to do about it?" Tyler found his voice first. "What do you mean?" "I mean, you've got talent individually, but together you've got magic. That doesn't happen often. Most musicians spend their whole careers looking for that kind of connection." George paused, studying each of their faces. "I'm in Nashville for the next month working on a project. If you're interested, I'd like to help you figure out what comes next. No guarantees, no promises of stardom, but at least give you a fighting chance to see if this music thing can work." "Why would you do that?" Jessica asked, echoing Daniel's earlier question. "Because I remember what it's like to be where you are," George said simply. "Because somebody helped me once, and this is how I pay that debt forward. And because," he gestured toward them, "you just created something beautiful in a subway station on a random Monday morning. If you can do that here, with that equipment, in these circumstances, imagine what you might do with actual resources and support." The 3 musicians stood silent, each processing what was being offered. It felt too good to be true, too much like a fairy tale. Things like this didn't happen in real life. Famous musicians didn't appear in subway stations and offer to mentor struggling artists. Except, apparently, sometimes they did. Tyler thought about his father's disappointed face, his dwindling savings, the mounting pressure to give up and return to medical school. He thought about the past 3 years of struggle and doubt. And he thought about how it felt to play music with Jessica and Daniel, like coming home after a long journey. Jessica thought about her empty classroom, her dismissed students, the career she had built and lost. She thought about the shame of playing in subway stations, the constant fear of not making rent, the slow erosion of her dignity. And she thought about how her violin had sung when combined with Tyler's guitar and Daniel's drums, like rediscovering a forgotten language. Daniel thought about his mother's medical bills, his exhausting overnight shifts, the constant calculation of dollars and cents. He thought about his makeshift drum kit and how he had convinced himself it was enough. And he thought about what it felt like to play real music with real musicians, like breathing freely for the first time in years. "I'm in," Daniel said suddenly. "I don't know what you're offering exactly, but whatever it is, I'm in." "Me too," Jessica added, her voice stronger than it had been all morning. "I have to try." Tyler looked at both of them, then at George Strait, then down at his worn Martin guitar. He thought about all the reasonable objections, all the practical concerns, all the logical reasons to be cautious. Then he thought about why he had left medical school in the first place. Because sometimes you have to choose faith over logic, hope over certainty. "Yes," Tyler said simply. "Whatever this is, I'm ready." George smiled, that warm, genuine smile that had comforted millions through his songs. "Good. Then let's figure out what you've got and where we can take it. First things first, you can't work on an empty stomach. There's a diner 2 blocks from here called the Bluebird Cafe. Meet me there in 30 minutes. We'll talk about next steps over breakfast." He started to walk away, then turned back. "Oh, and bring your instruments. Nashville's built on impromptu sessions, and something tells me we're just getting started." As George Strait climbed the stairs and disappeared into the gray November morning, the 3 musicians stood looking at each other, still processing what had just happened. The morning commuters resumed their rushing. The trains came and went, and the fluorescent lights continued their flickering dance. But something fundamental had shifted. Tyler began packing his guitar carefully into its case. His hands were shaking slightly, adrenaline and disbelief coursing through him. Did that actually just happen? "I think so," Jessica said, carefully placing her violin in its case. "Unless we're all having the same hallucination." "If we are, don't wake me up," Daniel said, gathering his buckets and paint cans. "This is the best dream I've had in years." They worked in silence for a few minutes, each lost in their own thoughts. When they finished packing, they stood together awkwardly. 3 strangers who had just been offered a chance at something extraordinary by one of the biggest names in country music. "I'm Tyler," Tyler said finally, extending his hand. "Tyler Bennett." "Jessica Browning," Jessica said, shaking his hand, then Daniel's. "Daniel Hayes," Daniel completed the introduction. "I guess we're doing this." "I guess we are," Tyler agreed. They climbed the stairs together, emerging from the underground into the cold November morning. The drizzle had stopped, and weak sunlight was attempting to break through the cloud cover. The streets of Nashville stretched out before them, suddenly full of possibility rather than just another day of struggle. None of them knew what would happen at the Bluebird Cafe. None of them knew if George Strait's offer would lead anywhere. None of them could predict where this unexpected morning would ultimately take them. But for the first time in longer than any of them could remember, they felt something that had been absent from their lives: hope. And sometimes, hope is enough to take the next step. The Bluebird Cafe sat nestled on a quiet corner of Nashville's Green Hills neighborhood, its modest exterior giving no indication of its legendary status in country music history. The small venue, which could hold barely more than 90 people, had launched countless careers and witnessed some of the most intimate performances in music history. Every serious musician in Nashville knew its significance. This was where Garth Brooks had been discovered, where Taylor Swift had honed her craft, where countless songwriters had tested their material before live audiences that understood the subtle craft of composition. Tyler, Jessica, and Daniel arrived 15 minutes after leaving the subway station, having shared an awkward Uber ride filled with nervous small talk and unspoken questions. The cafe wasn't open to the public yet. It didn't begin serving lunch until 11. But through the large front windows, they could see George Strait sitting at a corner table, 2 other people with him. "Should we just go in?" Jessica asked, clutching her violin case. "He told us to meet him here," Tyler reasoned, though his voice lacked confidence. "I think we just knock?" Before they could decide, the door opened from inside. A woman in her mid-50s with short gray hair and warm brown eyes smiled at them. "You must be Tyler, Jessica, and Daniel. Come on in. George is waiting." They entered the cafe, immediately enveloped by the warmth inside and the rich smell of coffee. The interior was cozy, with dark wood paneling, vintage music posters, and dozens of signed photographs covering the walls, a visual history of country music captured in frames. Small round tables filled the main floor, facing a tiny stage in the corner that seemed impossibly small to have hosted so many legendary performances. George Strait stood as they approached, gesturing to the empty chairs around the expanded table. "Right on time. I appreciate punctuality," he indicated the woman who had let them in. "This is Amy Patterson, the manager here. She's kind enough to let us use the space before opening." Amy nodded warmly. "Any friends of George's are welcome here. Can I get you some coffee? Breakfast?" The 3 musicians accepted gratefully, suddenly aware of how hungry they were. Daniel couldn't remember the last time he had eaten, possibly dinner yesterday before his shift, which meant nearly 18 hours ago. Jessica's stomach growled audibly, causing her to blush with embarrassment. George indicated the man sitting beside him, a thin individual in his early 60s with wire-rimmed glasses and the focused expression of someone who missed nothing. "This is Robert Chen, my manager and producer. He's been with me for 23 years, and there's nobody in this business whose judgment I trust more." Robert shook hands with each of them, his grip firm but brief. "George filled me in on what happened this morning. I watched the video someone posted on YouTube. It already has 40,000 views, by the way." "Wait, what?" Tyler said, startled. Robert pulled out his phone and turned it toward them. Sure enough, someone had recorded their impromptu performance of Amazing Grace in the subway station and uploaded it. The video quality was poor, the audio unbalanced, but the performance itself came through clearly. The comments section was already filling with reactions. "Who are these people? The guy in the hat is George Strait. That violin player is amazing. I need a full version of this." "Welcome to the internet age," Robert said dryly. "Nothing stays private anymore. But in this case, that works in your favor. The video is generating interest, which means timing is good for what George wants to propose." Amy returned with coffee and menus, giving them a few minutes to order while she took care of other preparations for the day's opening. They ordered quickly. Tyler got pancakes and eggs, Jessica chose an omelet, and Daniel ordered what was probably enough food for 2 people, earning a knowing glance from George that suggested he understood the young man's financial circumstances. When Amy left to place their orders with the kitchen staff, George leaned forward, his expression becoming more serious and businesslike. Let me be direct about what I'm thinking, and you can tell me if I'm completely off base. What I saw this morning was raw talent combined with genuine chemistry. Those are the two things you can't manufacture or teach. Everything else, technique, stage presence, production quality, industry knowledge, that can be learned and developed. He paused, taking a sip of his coffee. Here's what I'm proposing. I'm in Nashville for the next month, working on a tribute album project. During that time, I have access to studio space, session time, and various industry resources. What I'd like to do is spend some of that time working with you three. See what you've got. Help you develop your sound. Introduce you to some people who matter in this business. What's the catch? Daniel asked bluntly. There's always a catch. George didn't seem offended by the question. The catch is that I can't guarantee anything beyond the opportunity. I'm not offering you a record deal or promising you'll become stars. What I'm offering is mentorship, resources, and connections. What you do with those things is up to you. You'll still need talent, work ethic, and a fair amount of luck. Robert leaned in, adding his perspective. What George isn't mentioning is that he doesn't do this often. In 30 years, I've seen him take a personal interest in maybe 3 or 4 artists outside his immediate professional circle. When he does, he's thorough, but he's also honest. If he doesn't think you have what it takes, he'll tell you straight and bow out gracefully. Jessica found her voice, though it trembled slightly. Why us? There are thousands of talented musicians in Nashville. What makes us different? That's a fair question, George acknowledged. Honestly, it's the combination of things I saw this morning. Individual talent is common in Nashville. This city is full of people who can play, sing, and write. But watching you three find each other musically in real time, with no preparation or discussion, that's rare. Add in the fact that you're all clearly going through difficult circumstances, but still choosing to make music. That shows the kind of dedication this business requires. He gestured toward Tyler. You left medical school to pursue music. That's not a decision someone makes lightly. That tells me you're serious. He turned to Jessica. You're a trained classical musician playing in subway stations rather than giving up your instrument. That's dignity and determination. Finally, he looked at Daniel. You're working overnight shifts and still showing up to play on buckets because you can't afford drums. That's passion. Their breakfast arrived, temporarily interrupting the conversation. As they began eating, Daniel attacking his food with the intensity of someone who didn't know when the next meal might come, George continued outlining his thoughts. Here's what I'm thinking for structure. We'll meet 3 times a week at a studio I have access to. During those sessions, we'll work on your sound, help you develop original material, record some demos, and generally see what emerges. Outside those sessions, you'll have homework, writing assignments, practice routines, industry education. What about our current situations? Tyler asked. I mean, I still need to make money. I'm guessing Jessica and Daniel do too. That's where it gets interesting, Robert interjected. George and I have discussed this. We're prepared to offer each of you a modest stipend for the month, $2,000 per person, paid weekly. That should cover basic expenses and reduce the pressure to spend all your time busking or working other jobs. The 3 musicians stared at him in stunned silence. $2,000 might not sound like much to successful artists, but for them, it represented breathing room they hadn't had in months or years. There are conditions, George added quickly. The stipend requires your commitment to the full month. If you decide to quit halfway through, or if you don't put in the work required, the arrangement ends. We're investing time and money into this, and we need to know you're equally invested. Additionally, Robert continued, "we'll be documenting parts of this process. Nothing that would make you uncomfortable, but photos, some video, recordings of your development. If something comes of this, and I emphasize if, having that documentation helps tell your story. And stories matter in this business almost as much as music." Jessica set down her fork, her omelet only half eaten despite her earlier hunger. "I need to ask something that might sound stupid, but I have to know. Is this legitimate? I've heard stories about scams in Nashville. People taking advantage of desperate musicians with promises that turn out to be schemes." George nodded approvingly. "That's not a stupid question at all. It's exactly the right question to ask. Robert, show them the contracts." Robert pulled several documents from a leather portfolio. "These are standard mentorship agreements. They outline what George and I are providing: studio time, stipend payments, industry introductions. They also outline what we expect from you: attendance, effort, professionalism. There's no obligation beyond this month, no hidden clauses, no rights to your music or future earnings. You can have a lawyer review them if you want. In fact, I'd recommend it." "I don't have a lawyer," Daniel said flatly. "Then we'll arrange for an independent entertainment attorney to review the contracts on your behalf, at our expense," Robert responded. "This offer is legitimate, and we want you to feel completely comfortable with every aspect of it." Tyler studied the document in front of him, trying to process the legal language. His medical school training had taught him to read complex texts carefully, but entertainment law was its own specialized beast. Still, the core elements seemed straightforward. No ownership claims, no long-term obligations, just a month-long mentorship with financial support. "Can we have 24 hours to think about it?" Tyler asked. "Not because we're not interested, but because this is a major decision, and it happened very fast." "Absolutely," George agreed. "This is going to change your lives for the next month at minimum, possibly longer. You should think it through. Talk to people you trust. Maybe have those contracts reviewed like Robert suggested. We'll meet back here tomorrow morning at 9. If you want to move forward, we'll start immediately. If you decide it's not right for you, no hard feelings." They finished breakfast discussing logistics and practicalities. George and Robert outlined what the studio sessions would involve, explained how they would balance working on original material versus covers, and described some of the industry professionals they might meet during the month. The conversation gradually shifted from business to music itself. Influences, favorite artists, formative musical experiences. Tyler talked about growing up on classic rock. His father had been a huge Bruce Springsteen fan, and the themes of blue-collar struggle in those songs had resonated deeply. Jessica described her classical training, but also her secret love of bluegrass and folk music, the way her grandmother had played Hungarian folk melodies that shared surprising similarities with Appalachian music. Daniel explained his jazz education through his father's record collection, but also his fascination with modern hip-hop production and how rhythmic complexity transcended genre. George listened carefully, occasionally asking questions, never dominating the conversation despite being its most accomplished participant. He told stories about his own musical journey, the years of struggle in Texas, honky-tonks, the near-miss opportunities, the moments of doubt, and the eventual breakthrough that seemed to come both suddenly and after years of preparation. "The thing about this business," George said as their breakfast plates were cleared away, "is that overnight success usually takes about 10 years. People see the breakthrough moment and think that's when it all started, but they don't see the decade of groundwork that made that moment possible. What I'm offering you isn't a shortcut to success. I'm offering you a chance to accelerate your development, to learn in a month what might otherwise take you a year to figure out on your own." As the cafe's opening time approached, and Amy began preparing for the day's regular service, the group prepared to leave. George and Robert had other appointments. The music business didn't stop just because they had taken a morning to mentor unknown artists. But before they parted, George had one more thing to say. "I want to be clear about something. This morning in the subway station, I didn't help you because I felt sorry for you. I helped you because I heard something worth developing. The moment you start thinking of this as charity, the whole thing falls apart. This is an investment in your talent, in your potential, in the music you might create. Investments require returns, and the return I'm looking for is seeing you become the best musicians you can be." He stood, preparing to leave, then added, "One more thing. Tonight, think about what you want from music. Not what you think you should want. Not what would make your families happy or impress other people. What do you actually want? Because that answer will determine everything about how we approach this month together." After George and Robert left, Tyler, Jessica, and Daniel sat at the table for a few more minutes, none of them quite ready to return to their regular lives. The contrast between this warm cafe where they had just shared breakfast with a country music legend and the cold subway platform where they usually spent their mornings felt almost surreal. Did that actually happen? Jessica asked again, a question that was becoming their unofficial refrain. "I think so," Tyler replied, "unless we're all experiencing a very elaborate group hallucination." "What are you going to do?" Daniel asked, looking at both of them. "About the offer, I mean." Tyler considered the question carefully. "Honestly, I'm terrified. This could be the chance I've been waiting for, or it could be a month-long distraction from building something sustainable. But I think I'd regret not trying more than I'd regret failing." "I'm signing those contracts," Daniel said decisively. $2,000 means I can cut back my warehouse hours and actually sleep occasionally. Plus, I get to spend a month learning from George Strait and playing real music with real musicians. Even if nothing else comes of it, that's worth doing." Jessica was quiet, staring into her coffee cup. When she finally spoke, her voice was thick with emotion. "I spent 6 years teaching music to middle school students, watching them discover they could make something beautiful, helping them find their voices. That was everything to me. When I lost that job, I lost my identity. These past months playing in the subway have felt like falling through space with nothing to grab onto." She looked up at Tyler and Daniel, tears in her eyes. "This morning, playing with you two, I felt like a musician again. Not a former teacher scraping by, not a failure, but an actual musician making actual music. Even if this month leads nowhere professionally, I need it. I need to remember who I am." The three of them sat in comfortable silence, understanding passing between them without words. They were three strangers who had been thrust together by circumstance and opportunity. But in that moment, they began to feel like something more, like a team, like collaborators, like people who might be able to create something meaningful together. "We should exchange phone numbers," Tyler suggested practically. "If we're doing this, we need to be able to communicate." They pulled out their phones. Daniel's was a battered Android with a cracked screen. Jessica's was several generations old iPhone. Tyler's was slightly newer but still showing its age, and exchanged contact information. It was a small, mundane action, but it felt significant, like the first concrete step toward whatever came next. "What do we do now?" Daniel asked. "I mean, for the rest of the day." "I should probably practice," Jessica said. "If we're going to be working with George Strait, I want to make sure I'm sharp." "I need to sleep," Daniel admitted. "Haven't slept since yesterday morning before my shift. But then, yeah, practice." "I might see if I can find an entertainment lawyer who will look at these contracts," Tyler said. "Robert said they'd pay for it, so might as well take advantage." They gathered their belongings, Tyler's guitar case, Jessica's violin, Daniel's collection of buckets he had somehow transported on the bus, and walked out of the Bluebird Cafe together. The November sun had finally broken through the clouds, warming the streets of Nashville and casting everything in golden light that seemed almost prophetic. "Same time tomorrow?" Jessica asked. "9 o'clock?" "Same time tomorrow," Tyler confirmed. "Whatever happens next, we do it together." They parted ways at the corner, each heading back to their separate lives, but carrying with them the weight and possibility of the morning's events. Tyler walked toward the bus stop that would take him back to his apartment in East Nashville. Jessica headed toward her car, a 15-year-old Honda Civic that barely started most mornings, but represented independence and freedom. Daniel caught a different bus toward his mother's apartment in Antioch, already calculating how much of the stipend money he could allocate to her medical expenses while still covering his own basic needs. As Tyler rode the bus, watching Nashville pass by his window, he pulled out his phone and called his younger sister, Emma. She answered on the third ring, her voice bright with surprise. "Tyler, you never call during the day. Everything okay?" "Everything's..." Tyler paused, trying to find words for what had happened. "Something strange and possibly amazing just occurred. I need your opinion on something." He explained the morning's events, meeting George Strait in the subway station, the impromptu performance, the breakfast meeting at the Bluebird Cafe, the contracts and offer of mentorship. Emma listened without interrupting, which Tyler appreciated. His sister had always been his most supportive family member, the one person who had never questioned his decision to leave medical school. When he finished, Emma was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Tyler, do you remember what you told me the day you dropped out of med school?" "I said a lot of things that day. Mostly angry, defensive things." "No, I mean later, after everyone left, and it was just you and me on the porch. You said, 'I'd rather fail at something I love than succeed at something that makes me miserable.' Do you remember that?" Tyler did remember. It had been one of the hardest days of his life, facing his family's disappointment and confusion. But Emma had stayed after everyone else left, sitting with him in silence until he was ready to talk. "This is what you were talking about," Emma continued. "This is your chance to find out if you can succeed at what you love. You have to take it." "But what if it doesn't work out?" Tyler asked, voicing the fear that had been gnawing at him since leaving the cafe. "What if I spend this month working with George Strait, and at the end of it, I'm right back where I started, playing subway stations and wondering if I made a huge mistake leaving medical school? Then you'll be exactly where you are now, except you'll have spent a month learning from one of the greatest country musicians alive. And you'll have real answers instead of what-ifs," Emma said firmly. "Tyler, you can't live your life afraid of failure. You already made the brave choice once when you left medical school. Don't lose your courage now." Tyler felt something loosen in his chest, a tension he hadn't realized he was carrying. "You're right. I know you're right." "Of course I'm right. I'm always right," Emma said with audible warmth. "Now go practice your guitar and stop second-guessing yourself. And Tyler, I'm proud of you. I know Dad doesn't say it, and maybe he never will, but I'm proud of you for following your dream." After hanging up, Tyler spent the rest of the bus ride staring at the contract Robert had given him. The legal language was dense, but the core message was clear. 1 month, focused mentorship, no strings attached beyond that commitment. It was everything Emma had said. An opportunity to find real answers instead of living with what-ifs. Jessica drove home to her small studio apartment in Sylvan Park, parking her aging Honda in the cramped lot behind the building. She climbed the stairs to the second floor, unlocked her door, and immediately saw the stack of bills on her kitchen counter, the ones she had been avoiding for days. She picked up the top envelope, a credit card statement, and forced herself to open it. The balance was higher than she remembered, 4,147 dollars. Below that, a note about minimum payment due, 127 dollars. She had been making minimum payments for months, watching the balance slowly climb despite her best efforts. The interest alone was eating her alive. She opened the other envelopes methodically. Electric bill, $89, car insurance, $143, rent, $875, due in 5 days. Student loans, $312 per month, currently 3 weeks past due. The total came to more than she had in her bank account, more than she could reasonably earn in the next week through subway performances. But if she accepted George Strait's offer, she would receive $500 per week for 4 weeks. $2,000 total. It wouldn't solve all her problems, but it would give her breathing room she desperately needed. She could catch up on rent, make payments on the past due student loans, maybe even reduce that credit card balance slightly. Jessica set down the bills and picked up her violin. She didn't bother with sheet music, just let her fingers find their way across the strings, playing whatever came naturally. A melody emerged, something she didn't recognize at first, then realized she was creating it in real time. An original composition flowing from her instrument without conscious thought. She recorded it on her phone, playing through the melody 3 times, developing it, adding variations. When she finished, she listened back to the recording. It was rough, unpolished, but there was something there, a melancholic beauty that captured exactly how she felt in this moment of uncertainty and possibility. Jessica thought about what George had said, about wanting to know what they actually wanted from music. She had spent so long defining herself as a teacher that she had forgotten she had once wanted to be a performer. In college, she had dreamed of playing with orchestras, of recording albums, of hearing her own compositions performed by other musicians. But those dreams had faded as practical concerns took precedence. Getting a stable job, paying off student loans, building a predictable career. Now, sitting in her tiny apartment with bills she couldn't pay and a future that seemed impossibly uncertain, those old dreams felt both terrifying and exhilarating. What did she want from music? She wanted to create something meaningful. She wanted to touch people the way music had touched her. She wanted to prove that all those years of practice and sacrifice had been leading somewhere. She picked up the contract and read through it carefully. The terms were exactly as Robert had described. Clear, straightforward, no hidden clauses. At the bottom was a line for her signature and a date field. She didn't sign it, not yet, but she set it on her kitchen counter where she would see it first thing in the morning. Daniel arrived at his mother's apartment in Antioch just before noon. He used his key to let himself in quietly, not wanting to wake her if she was resting. The apartment was small, just 2 bedrooms, a combination living room and kitchen, 1 bathroom, but his mother kept it immaculately clean despite her declining mobility. He found Patricia Hayes sitting in her wheelchair by the living room window, a book open in her lap, but her attention focused on the view outside. She turned when she heard him enter, her face brightening immediately. "Danny, I wasn't expecting you until later." Daniel crossed the room and kissed his mother's forehead. At 53, Patricia looked older than her years, the MS having aged her prematurely. Her hands trembled slightly even when at rest, and her legs were covered with a blanket despite the apartment's warmth. The disease had affected her ability to regulate body temperature. "Something happened this morning," Daniel said, pulling over a kitchen chair to sit beside her. "Something big." He told her everything, watching her expression shift from confusion to wonder to cautious concern. Patricia had always been his strongest supporter, but she was also practical, shaped by years of financial struggle and disappointment. When he finished explaining, she was quiet for a long moment. "This man, George Strait, he's famous?" she asked finally. "Mom, He's not just famous, he's a legend. He's sold over 100 million records. He's had more #1 hits than almost anyone in country music history. And he wants to spend a month mentoring me. But what happens after that month? Patricia asked, her maternal concern evident. You'd be giving up your warehouse job, or at least cutting your hours significantly. What happens if this mentorship ends and you're back where you started, except now you don't have steady income? Daniel had anticipated this question. The contract includes a stipend, $2,000 for the month. That's actually more than I make at the warehouse after taxes. And I could keep working reduced hours if needed. But Mom, this is a chance to actually do something with my music. Real music. Not just playing buckets in subway stations. Patricia reached out with her trembling hand and placed it over her son's. Danny, I've never wanted you to sacrifice your dreams for me. These past 3 years since the diagnosis, watching you work yourself to exhaustion while I get sicker, it breaks my heart. You're not a burden, Daniel said firmly. A conversation they had had many times. I know you don't see me that way, but I see how hard you work. I see you leave for overnight shifts and come straight to the subway to play music because you love it, even though you must be exhausted. I see you counting pennies to pay for my medications. Patricia's eyes filled with tears. If this opportunity is real, if it could lead to something better for you, you have to take it. Don't let worrying about me hold you back. But your medications will get paid for somehow, like they always do. Danny, I didn't raise you to play it safe. Your father and I, we had dreams too. We were going to open a jazz club, do you remember? I was going to manage it. He was going to perform. But we got scared. We chose security over dreams. And look where it got us. He left anyway. And I'm still here wishing we had been braver. She squeezed his hand with what strength she had. Be braver than we were. Take this chance. Even if it only lasts a month, even if nothing else comes of it, you'll know you tried. That's worth more than any amount of money. Daniel felt his throat tighten with emotion. What if I fail? What if I'm not good enough? Then you fail, and you figure out what comes next. But Danny, I've listened to you play since you were 8 years old, making rhythm with wooden spoons on pots and pans. You have a gift. Maybe this George Strait sees what I've always seen, that you're meant for more than loading boxes in a warehouse. They sat together in comfortable silence, mother and son, both understanding that this decision would change the trajectory of Daniel's life, regardless of which choice he made. Finally, Daniel pulled out the contract and showed it to his mother. Would you read through this with me? Make sure I'm not missing anything important? Patricia smiled, pushing her reading glasses up her nose. Of course. Let's see what we're dealing with. They spent the next hour going through the contract line by line. Patricia had worked as a legal secretary before her MS diagnosis, and though entertainment law wasn't her specialty, she understood contracts well enough to identify any potential problems. She found none. The terms were exactly as George and Robert had described: straightforward, fair, no hidden obligations. This looks legitimate, Patricia concluded. These people are either genuinely trying to help you, or they're the most elaborate scammers I've ever seen. And given that this George Strait is already wealthy and famous, I'm inclined to believe it's genuine. Daniel folded the contract carefully and placed it in his backpack. I'm going to do it. I'm going to sign tomorrow morning and commit to this month fully. Whatever happens, happens. Good, Patricia said firmly. Now, did you eat breakfast? You look exhausted. I had a huge breakfast at the Bluebird Cafe with George Strait, Daniel said, still marveling at the surreality of that sentence. But I should sleep for a few hours before my shift tonight. You're still going to work tonight? Even with everything that happened? I haven't signed the contract yet, haven't received the first stipend payment. Bills don't stop just because I had an interesting morning. Daniel stood, stretching his tired muscles. I'll sleep now, work tonight, and tomorrow morning I'll sign those papers and start this new chapter. He headed toward his small bedroom, pausing at the doorway. Mom, thanks for always believing in me, even when I didn't believe in myself. That's what mothers do, Patricia said softly. Now go sleep. You have a big day tomorrow. That evening, as the sun set over Nashville and the city's famous neon lights began to glow, 3 separate people sat in 3 separate locations, each holding the same contract, each wrestling with the same decision. Tyler sat on the small balcony of his shared apartment in East Nashville, guitar across his lap, contract on the small table beside him. His roommate, another struggling musician named Jake, was inside practicing bass. The sounds of the city surrounded him: traffic, distant music from the bars on Gallatin Avenue, neighbors talking on their porches. He thought about his father's disappointment, his dwindling savings, the practical reality that he couldn't pursue music indefinitely without success. But he also thought about how it felt to play with Jessica and Daniel, how naturally their sounds had blended, how right it had seemed. He thought about George Strait's words, "Overnight success usually takes about 10 years. Maybe this month wouldn't lead to stardom, but it would be 10 years worth of learning compressed into 30 days. That had value regardless of the outcome." Tyler picked up a pen and signed the contract. Whatever came next, he was committed. Jessica sat at her small kitchen table, the contract illuminated by the overhead light, a cup of tea growing cold beside her. She had spent the afternoon practicing, working through classical pieces and the original composition she had created earlier. Her fingers felt strong, her technique solid. She wasn't rusty or unprepared. She was ready for this opportunity, even if the timing seemed impossibly random. She thought about her grandmother, who had fled Hungary after World War II with nothing but her violin. That instrument had represented hope and continuity, a connection to culture and identity that couldn't be taken away. Now, Jessica held that same violin, facing her own crossroads. What would her grandmother do? The answer was obvious. Her grandmother had crossed an ocean to pursue music and freedom. Jessica could certainly commit to 1 month of intensive mentorship. She signed the contract with a steady hand. Daniel lay on his narrow bed in his mother's apartment, the contract resting on his chest, staring at the ceiling. His alarm was set for 10:30 p.m., giving him 6 hours of sleep before his midnight shift at the warehouse. His body was exhausted, but his mind raced with possibilities and fears. He thought about all the practical obstacles: his mother's medical bills, the warehouse job that paid barely enough to survive, the reality that most musicians never made it beyond subway platforms and dive bars. But he also thought about the moment, that morning when he had played with Tyler and Jessica, when their 3 separate sounds had become one unified piece of music. That feeling of connection, of creating something beautiful with other people, was what he had been chasing his entire life. His mother's words echoed in his mind. Be braver than we were. Daniel sat up, found a pen, and signed the contract. Tomorrow morning, his life would change. Tonight, he still had to work his shift, load his boxes, earn his paycheck. But tomorrow, everything would be different. In a luxury hotel room across town, George Strait sat reviewing the video from the subway station that had now surpassed 200,000 views. Robert sat across from him, working on his laptop, coordinating the studio time and resources they would need for the next month. Think they'll all sign? Robert asked, without looking up. Yes, George said with certainty. They'd be fools not to. And whatever else they might be, they're not fools. They're talented, desperate, and brave enough to be playing music in subway stations despite difficult circumstances. That combination creates the hunger necessary to succeed in this business. And if they don't have what it takes, if the talent doesn't translate to commercial success? George was quiet for a moment, still watching the video of three strangers becoming a band in real time. Then we'll have spent a month helping three people become better musicians and giving them a chance they wouldn't have had otherwise. That's not a waste of time or resources. That's just being human. Robert smiled slightly, a rare expression for the usually serious manager. You're getting soft in your old age. Maybe, George agreed. Or maybe I'm just remembering what it was like to be where they are now. Talented enough to dream, but not yet successful enough to believe. Someone gave me a chance once. This is how I keep that cycle going. He closed his laptop and stood, walking to the hotel room window that overlooked the glittering lights of Nashville. Somewhere out there, three musicians were making the decision that would determine their futures. George had done his part by offering the opportunity. Now it was up to them to take it. Tomorrow morning, they would all meet at the Bluebird Cafe again. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. Tomorrow, three separate journeys would merge into one collaborative path. Destination unknown, but direction clear. In Nashville, a city built on dreams and songs, another chapter in country music history was about to be written. And for once, the king of country wouldn't be writing it alone. The recording studio George had arranged was located in a nondescript building in Berry Hill, a neighborhood just south of downtown Nashville, known for its concentration of music industry businesses. From the outside, the structure looked like any other commercial warehouse. Gray concrete walls, small windows, a simple door with an intercom system. But inside was one of the most sophisticated recording facilities in Nashville, equipped with vintage analog equipment, alongside cutting-edge digital systems. Tyler, Jessica, and Daniel arrived separately, but within minutes of each other at 9:00 a.m. sharp. They had all signed their contracts at the Bluebird Cafe earlier that morning. A brief ceremony that felt simultaneously momentous and anticlimactic. Robert had collected the signed documents, handed each of them a check for the first week's stipend, $500 that felt like a fortune, and given them the studio address with instructions to arrive promptly. Now they stood in the studio's lobby, a comfortable waiting area with leather couches, music magazines, and gold and platinum records adorning the walls. A young woman with purple hair and multiple piercings sat at the reception desk. "You must be Tyler, Jessica, and Daniel," she said warmly. "I'm Zoe, the studio assistant. George and Robert are already in Studio B. Follow me." She led them down a hallway lined with photographs of legendary recording sessions: Johnny Cash, Dolly Parton, Willie Nelson, and countless others who had created magic within these walls. The corridor opened into a large control room dominated by a massive mixing console that looked like the cockpit of a spaceship. Through the soundproof glass, they could see the main recording room, a spacious area with proper acoustic treatment, professional microphones on stands, a drum kit in one corner, amplifiers along the walls, and multiple instruments ready to be played. George stood in the control room speaking with a woman in her 40s who wore headphones around her neck and had the focused demeanor of someone who took her work seriously. Robert sat at the mixing console, reviewing notes on a tablet. "Right on time," George said, smiling as they entered. "I appreciate that. This is Linda Morrison, our lead sound engineer. She's been recording in Nashville for 22 years, and there's nobody better at capturing authentic sound." Linda shook hands with each of them, her grip professional and assessing. "George told me about your subway performance. I watched the video. Impressive chemistry for a first encounter. Today, we're going to see if that chemistry translates to a studio environment, which is a completely different animal." She gestured toward the control room's speakers. Out in the open air, sound dissipates. In here, every note, every breath, every tiny imperfection gets captured and amplified. Some musicians who sound great fall apart in the studio. Others discover the studio is where they truly shine. We're going to find out which category you fall into. George leaned against the mixing console, his expression thoughtful. Today isn't about perfection. It's about establishing a baseline, understanding your current skill level, your strengths, your areas that need development. We're going to record several pieces. Some covers you all know, some original material if you have it, and some improvisation to see how you work together spontaneously. He looked at each of them in turn. I need you to be honest about your limitations and confident about your strengths. If you can't hit a note, say so. If you need more practice time, ask for it. Studio time is expensive, and we can't afford to waste it on ego or false confidence. Questions? What should we start with? Tyler asked, his guitar case already in hand. Let's start with something you all know well enough to play comfortably, Linda suggested. What songs do all three of you know by heart? They looked at each other, mentally running through common standards. Finally, Jessica suggested, Hallelujah by Leonard Cohen. The melody is simple enough that I can add violin arrangements, and the structure allows for improvisation. Works for me, Tyler agreed. I've played it hundreds of times. Same, Daniel confirmed, though I'll need to use your drum kit instead of my buckets. The kit's already set up for you, George said. It's a basic 5-piece, nothing fancy, but it's professional equipment. Take some time to get comfortable with it before we start recording. They moved into the main recording room, and immediately the space felt different from anywhere they had performed before. The acoustic treatment absorbed and shaped sound in unfamiliar ways. The professional equipment was both exciting and intimidating. This wasn't a subway platform or a street corner. This was where real music got made. Daniel approached the drum kit with visible apprehension. It was a beautiful setup. Ludwig Classic Maple in a vintage finish, Zildjian cymbals, professional hardware throughout. He sat on the throne, adjusted the height, and tentatively tapped the snare drum. The sound was crisp, perfectly tuned, utterly unlike his collection of buckets and paint cans. Go ahead and play around with it. Linda's voice came through the studio speakers. We've got time. Find your comfort zone. Daniel began slowly, testing each drum and cymbal, adjusting positions, getting a feel for the responsiveness. Gradually, his confidence grew, and he started playing actual rhythms, simple at first, then more complex. His hands had muscle memory from his makeshift kit, but the drums responded differently, with more precision and dynamic range. Tyler plugged his guitar into one of the studio amplifiers, a vintage Fender Twin Reverb that was worth more than every piece of equipment he owned combined. He played a few test chords, amazed by the clarity and warmth of the sound. His battered Martin guitar suddenly sounded expensive, professional. The amplifier revealing nuances in his playing he hadn't known existed. Jessica stood with her violin, feeling oddly exposed without the casual atmosphere of street performance. In the subway, she could hide behind the anonymity of the crowd, the constant movement, the understanding that most people weren't really listening. Here, with professional microphones positioned to capture every detail, every imperfection would be audible. How do you want to arrange this? George's voice came through the monitors. Tyler, you want to start with the basic chord progression? They spent 15 minutes working out the arrangement. Tyler would handle the main melody and chords. Jessica would add violin harmonies and counter melodies. Daniel would provide rhythmic foundation with emphasis on dynamics rather than complexity. It was a simple plan, but executing it in a studio environment proved more challenging than anticipated. Their first attempt was technically proficient, but emotionally flat. Linda stopped them after 2 verses. "The notes are right, but you're all thinking too much," she observed. "You're treating this like a test instead of a performance. Remember what George said. We saw you create something beautiful in a subway station with minimal equipment. That same magic exists in you. Stop worrying about the technology and just play." They tried again. This time, Tyler closed his eyes and focused on the song's emotional core. Leonard Cohen's meditation on brokenness and transcendence. The paradox of finding holiness in imperfection. Jessica let her violin voice breathe, adding spaces between notes rather than filling every moment with sound. Daniel relaxed into the groove, allowing dynamics to ebb and flow naturally. By the 3rd attempt, something clicked. The song transformed from a cover into an interpretation, their 3 instruments weaving together to create something that honored the original while adding their own perspective. Tyler's voice, which he had been self-conscious about, found its honest tone, not perfect, but authentic. Jessica's violin soared during the chorus, adding an almost sacred quality. Daniel's drums provided subtle momentum without overwhelming the melody. When they finished, the control room was silent for a long moment. Then George's voice came through, warm with approval. "That's what I'm talking about. That's the sound we're chasing. Linda, did you get that?" "Every note," Linda confirmed. "Want to hear it back?" They gathered in the control room, crowding around the mixing console as Linda queued up the playback. Hearing themselves through professional studio monitors was revelatory. The sound was fuller, richer, more cohesive than anything they had imagined. Jessica's violin, which always sounded slightly thin through her small practice amplifier, had depth and resonance. Tyler's guitar work, which he had always been critical of, showed surprising sophistication. Daniel's drumming provided a foundation that made everything else feel grounded and intentional. "Is that really us?" Jessica asked, almost whispering. "That's you with proper equipment and engineering," Linda said. But the talent was always there. The studio just revealed it more clearly. Robert, who had been silent until now, leaned forward. "This is good, very good. But good won't be enough if you want to make it in this industry. Nashville is full of musicians who are good. You need to be distinctive. You need a sound that makes people stop and say, 'Who is that?' What does that sound like for us?" Tyler asked. "That's what we're going to spend the next month figuring out," George said. "You've got the foundation, strong individual skills and natural chemistry. Now, we need to develop your identity as a group. That starts with understanding your influences and inspirations." He gestured for them to sit. "Tell me about the music that shaped you. Not just what you like or what's popular. What music fundamentally changed how you understand the world?" Tyler went first, speaking about his father's Bruce Springsteen obsession and how those songs about working-class struggle and desperate dreams had become his template for understanding American life. But he also talked about discovering John Mayer in college and being blown away by the combination of technical guitar work and emotionally vulnerable songwriting. The tension between his father's earnest anthems and Mayer's introspective explorations had created the foundation for his own writing. Jessica talked about growing up with classical music, her grandmother's Hungarian folk melodies, her formal training in violin, her teenage rebellion when she discovered Alison Krauss and realized bluegrass could be as technically demanding and emotionally powerful as any classical piece. She described the revelation of hearing Nickel Creek for the first time and understanding that traditional instruments could create contemporary sounds. Her influences weren't country in the traditional sense, but they shared country music's emphasis on storytelling and authentic emotion. Daniel's journey was different. His father's jazz records had given him a foundation in complex rhythm and improvisation. But growing up in Nashville during the early 2000s, he had been exposed to the emerging hip-hop scene and became fascinated by the way producers like Jay Dilla and Questlove approached drums, not just as time-keeping instruments, but as melodic elements that shaped entire compositions. He had learned to hear rhythm everywhere, in traffic patterns, in conversations, in the mechanical sounds of his warehouse job. George listened carefully, occasionally asking questions, never judging or dismissing. When they finished, he was quiet for a moment before speaking. What's interesting is that none of you described traditional country music as your primary influence. Yet you all ended up in Nashville. That tells me something important. You're not trying to fit into existing categories. You're bringing outside influences into country's framework. That's how the genre evolves. He stood, walking to the window that overlooked the parking lot. Modern country music has become increasingly formulaic. There's a template: truck, girl, beer, dirt road. And songs that follow that template get played on the radio. But that's not where innovation happens. Innovation happens when people bring unexpected influences together and create something that sounds both familiar and new. Robert pulled up something on his tablet and turned it toward them. Look at the most successful genre-crossing country acts of the past 2 decades. Casey Musgraves brought indie pop sensibilities. Chris Stapleton brought blues and soul. The Highwomen incorporated folk and Americana. They succeeded not because they abandoned country music, but because they expanded its definition. So what does that mean for us? Jessica asked. It means we don't try to fit you into existing categories, George said. We figure out what happens when you combine classical violin, guitar-driven songwriting, and rhythm-focused percussion with country music's emphasis on storytelling. That combination doesn't exist in the market right now. It could be your distinctive sound. They spent the rest of the morning recording different pieces. A bluegrass standard that let Jessica showcase her technical violin skills, an original song Tyler had written about leaving medical school, and a pure improvisation where they just played for 10 minutes with no predetermined structure. Each recording revealed different aspects of their capabilities and chemistry. During a break for lunch, sandwiches and coffee provided by the studio, George pulled up charts and analytics on his tablet. "Let me show you something about the current music industry," he said, displaying streaming numbers and demographic data. Traditional album sales barely exist anymore. Artists make money through streaming, live performances, licensing, and merchandise. That means success isn't just about having hit songs, it's about building an audience that connects with your story and your sound. He scrolled through examples. Look at someone like Tyler Childers. He built his audience through word of mouth and social media before traditional country radio would touch him. Now he sells out amphitheaters and his albums debut in the top 10. Or Sturgill Simpson, who essentially ignored the country music establishment and found success by being authentically himself. The point, Robert added, is that you don't need permission from radio programmers or record labels to build a career anymore. You need great music, authentic connection with audiences, and strategic use of available platforms. That Subway video already has over 500,000 views. People are interested. Now we need to give them something worth staying interested in. They returned to the studio after lunch for what George described as the most important exercise of the day: writing an original song together from scratch. This would test not just their individual skills, but their ability to collaborate creatively, to compromise and contribute to a unified vision. Songwriting is where commercial success gets made or broken, George explained. You can be amazing performers, but if you're not creating original material that resonates with people, you'll always be limited. Today, we're going to see if you can write together. He gave them a simple prompt. Write a song about second chances. You have 2 hours. Use the studio, the instruments, whatever you need. I want to hear something at the end of those 2 hours. Doesn't have to be polished, but it has to be honest. George and Robert left them alone in the studio, retreating to the control room where they could observe without interfering. Tyler, Jessica, and Daniel looked at each other, suddenly aware they had never actually written music together before. Their subway performance had been improvisation over known songs. This was different. This required shared creative vision. "How do we even start?" Daniel asked. "With the feeling," Jessica suggested. "Second chances. What does that mean to each of us?" They talked for 20 minutes before touching their instruments, sharing stories about moments when they had been given second chances or wished they had been. Tyler talked about leaving medical school. That had been a second chance to choose his true path, even though his family saw it as throwing away his first chance. Jessica described losing her teaching job and how these months of subway performance had been a second chance to remember she was a musician, not just a teacher of music. Daniel spoke about his mother's diagnosis and how every day with her felt like both a gift and a countdown. The conversations were heavy, but necessary. They were building shared emotional vocabulary, finding the authentic core that would make the song meaningful rather than generic. Finally, Tyler picked up his guitar. "What if we approach it as a conversation?" he suggested. "Like, each verse is a different person's perspective on second chances. And the chorus is what we all share. That feeling of standing at a crossroads, not knowing if this chance will work out, but taking it anyway." They began building the song piece by piece. Tyler worked out a chord progression in E major, hopeful but tinged with melancholy. Jessica hummed melodies over the chords, finding a violin line that felt both grounded and aspirational. Daniel experimented with rhythms on the kit, eventually settling on a pattern that built gradually, starting minimal and adding complexity as the song progressed. The lyrics came slowly, painfully, with multiple revisions and debates. But eventually, they had something. First verse, Tyler's perspective. "I traded stethoscopes for guitar strings, traded certainty for the risk that freedom brings. My father said I'd thrown my life away, but I'm still learning how to live it every day." Second verse, Jessica's perspective. "I taught the young ones how to make music sing, never dreamed I'd lose everything. Now I'm standing on the street playing for spare change. But my bow still knows how to rearrange this pain." Third verse, Daniel's perspective. "I work the graveyard shift loading boxes tight, play the morning rush, then sleep away the light. My mother's getting sicker. Bills keep climbing high, but I still find rhythm in this broken lullaby." Chorus, all perspectives. "This might be my second chance at something real. This might be the moment when the future starts to heal. I don't know if I'll succeed or fall and crash, but I'll take this second chance, while it lasts." The bridge allowed for instrumental interplay. Jessica's violin and Tyler's guitar trading melodic phrases, while Daniel built intensity underneath. The final chorus repeated with added emphasis, all three instruments driving toward a resolution that felt earned rather than imposed. When the 2 hours ended and George and Robert returned to the studio, Tyler, Jessica, and Daniel were exhausted, but energized. They had created something genuine, something that couldn't have existed without all three of them contributing. "Let's hear it," George said simply. They performed the song live, standing close together in the recording room, headphones connecting them but their physical proximity, creating additional intimacy. The performance wasn't perfect. Tyler's voice cracked slightly on a high note. Jessica's bow squeaked during one transition. Daniel's rhythm faltered momentarily during the bridge. But the imperfections somehow made it more authentic, more human. When they finished, George was smiling. Not the polite smile of someone being encouraging, but the genuine smile of someone who had heard something special. "Play it again," he said. "Linda, let's capture this one properly." They recorded the song 4 more times, each take slightly different as they refined their approach. By the final version, the imperfections had been smoothed out without losing the emotional authenticity. When Linda played it back through the studio monitors, the 3 musicians stood in stunned silence. It was real. It was good. It was theirs. "This is your sound," George said with certainty. "Personal storytelling over country-influenced instrumentation with non-traditional elements. This is what makes you distinctive. This is what we build on." Robert was already taking notes on his tablet. "We need to record a proper demo EP, 4 or 5 songs with this same energy and approach. That becomes your calling card. What we use to generate industry interest and audience connection." 4 or 5 songs? Tyler said, slightly panicked. "In the time we have left?" "In the 3.5 weeks you have left," George corrected. "It's ambitious, but possible if you're willing to work. That means writing sessions, recording sessions, and practice on your own time. You up for it?" They looked at each other. 3 people who 24 hours ago had been strangers playing separately in a subway station. Now they were collaborators, partners in an uncertain but exhilarating creative journey. "Yes," they said simultaneously, then laughed at the unintentional harmony. "Good," George said, "because we're just getting started." That Titius. With the first session ended at 7:12 p.m., 10 hours after it had begun. Tyler, Jessica, and Daniel emerged from the studio exhausted but transformed. They had entered as individual musicians, hoping to learn from a legend. They were leaving as a band with a distinctive sound and a concrete path forward. As they stood in the parking lot, none of them quite ready to return to their separate lives, Tyler voiced what they were all thinking. That felt real. Like, actually real. Not just practice or hopeful dreaming, but the real thing. "It was real," Jessica confirmed. "We created something today that didn't exist yesterday. That's what music is supposed to be." Daniel pulled out his phone, checking messages. His mother had texted 3 times, worried because he had told her he would call during lunch and hadn't. He needed to get home, make sure she had eaten dinner, administer her evening medications. The responsibilities hadn't disappeared just because he had spent the day in a recording studio, but something had shifted. For years, Daniel had seen his music as an escape from his difficult circumstances, a brief respite from worry and responsibility. Today, for the first time, music felt like it could be a path forward rather than just a momentary distraction. That possibility, terrifying and thrilling in equal measure, changed everything. "Same time tomorrow?" Tyler asked, confirming the schedule George had outlined. "Same time tomorrow," Jessica and Daniel echoed. They parted ways, each heading home carrying recordings of their work, lyric sheets for Second Chance, the title they had settled on, and homework assignments from George. Study specific artists, practice particular techniques, write individual song ideas to bring to the next session. The Nashville night was cold and clear, stars visible despite the city's light pollution. Somewhere in the distance, live music poured from the honky-tonks on Broadway. Somewhere, other musicians were playing subway stations and street corners, hoping for their own moments of recognition. Somewhere, dreams were being born and dying simultaneously. But Tyler Bennett, Jessica Browning, and Daniel Hayes weren't thinking about other musicians or other dreams. They were thinking about what they had created today. A song that told their truth. A sound that felt distinctive. A collaboration that transformed their individual talents into something larger. They were thinking about second chances and how sometimes they arrive in unexpected forms in unlikely places. Sometimes a legend takes a subway and stops to listen. Sometimes 3 strangers become a band. Sometimes the impossible becomes possible, one song at a time. Tomorrow they would return to the studio and continue the work. Tomorrow they would write new songs, refine their sound, push themselves further. Tomorrow they would take another step on a journey with no guaranteed destination. But tonight, they each went home carrying the knowledge that they had done something real. And in an industry built on illusions and disappointments, reality was the rarest commodity of all. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of intensive creativity and grueling work. Tyler, Jessica, and Daniel fell into a rhythm that consumed their lives. Studio sessions 3 times per week, individual practice, and writing assignments filling the gaps between, and constant communication as they developed their sound and identity as a group. By the end of the first week, they had completed 2 more original songs. Highway Prayers emerged from a late-night writing session where Tyler shared stories about his drives through Tennessee, the way darkness and distance made confessions easier. The song captured that specific loneliness of long drives, simultaneously isolated and connected to everyone who had ever traveled the same roads seeking the same undefined something. Borrowed Time came from Daniel's perspective, a meditation on caring for his mother while watching her slowly decline. The lyrics were unflinchingly honest about the weight of responsibility mixed with love, the guilt of occasionally resenting circumstances beyond anyone's control, and the precious nature of moments that couldn't be reclaimed once lost. Jessica's violin work on this track was particularly stunning. She had written a counter-melody that felt like a conversation between past and present, youth and aging, hope and acceptance. George attended every session, offering guidance but never dominating. He understood that his role was to facilitate their development, not to impose his own artistic vision. Robert handled the business side, coordinating studio time, managing their stipend payments, and beginning to build industry awareness through carefully managed social media presence. The subway video had now surpassed 2 million views, spawning reaction videos, think pieces about the state of street performance, and genuine curiosity about the 3 musicians who had captured something authentic on a random Monday morning. Robert had created official social media accounts for what they were now calling the Second Chance Project, a name that felt both temporary and somehow appropriate for their current state of becoming. Linda Morrison, the sound engineer, became their 4th teacher. She showed them how to hear their own music critically, identifying when performances were technically proficient but emotionally hollow versus when slight imperfections carried authentic feeling that needed to be preserved. She taught them about microphone placement, room acoustics, and how different instruments interacted in recorded space versus live performance. Recording is its own instrument, Linda explained during their 2nd week. You need to learn how to play it just like you learned your guitars and drums and violin. Some of the greatest recordings in history have technical flaws, but they capture performances that could never be replicated. Your job is to find the balance between polish and authenticity. The studio sessions were intense, but the work outside them proved equally challenging. George had assigned them homework that pushed their boundaries and forced them to grow beyond their comfort zones. Tyler's assignment was to write 5 complete songs in 5 days, each in a different style: traditional country, folk, blues, rock, and pop. The goal wasn't perfection, but versatility, training himself to think beyond his default compositional patterns. He spent sleepless nights hunched over his guitar, filling notebooks with lyrics and chord progressions, discovering capabilities he hadn't known he possessed. Jessica's challenge was to learn 3 songs by contemporary artists she had never listened to before: Beyoncé's Halo, The Killer's Mr. Brightside, and Childish Gambino's Redbone. George wanted her to understand how violin could function across genres, to hear how string arrangements worked in contexts far removed from classical or country music. She spent hours with headphones, transcribing the underlying harmonies and reimagining how her instrument could contribute to radically different sonic landscapes. Daniel's assignment was perhaps the most difficult. He had to teach himself basic music theory. Unlike Tyler and Jessica, who had formal training, Daniel had learned rhythm intuitively through listening and experimentation. Now, George wanted him to understand the theoretical foundations underlying what his ears already knew. Robert had arranged for him to have 3 sessions with a music theory tutor, and Daniel spent his warehouse shifts listening to educational podcasts about scales, chord progressions, and harmonic relationships. The 3 of them communicated constantly through text messages and phone calls, sharing progress and frustrations, offering encouragement during moments of doubt. Without consciously deciding to do so, they had become each other's support system. No longer just collaborators, but friends united by shared struggle and common purpose. Tyler's roommate Jake noticed the transformation. "Dude, you're different," he observed one evening as Tyler practiced a particularly complex finger-picking pattern for the 100th time. "More focused. More, I don't know, present? This is real," Tyler said simply. "For the first time since leaving medical school, something feels real, rather than like I'm just treading water waiting for life to start." Jessica's transformation was equally pronounced. Her apartment, which had been dominated by unpaid bills and financial anxiety, was now filled with sheet music and composition notebooks. She had caught up on rent, made significant payments toward her credit card debt, and for the first time in months, could buy groceries without calculating every dollar. The financial breathing room allowed creative breathing room. She could focus on music rather than constantly worrying about survival. But more than the financial change, Jessica had rediscovered her identity as a musician rather than a failed teacher. She started wearing her grandmother's silver necklace again, a delicate piece she had put away after losing her job because it reminded her too painfully of dreams deferred. Now it represented connection to heritage and continuity. Her grandmother had crossed an ocean pursuing music, and Jessica was honoring that courage by pursuing her own path. Daniel's changes were perhaps most visible. He had reduced his warehouse hours to part-time, using the stipend money to cover the income gap. The extra sleep transformed him. His eyes were clearer, his movements less exhausted, his drumming more precise. His mother noticed immediately. "You look like my son again," Patricia said one evening, tears in her eyes. "For 3 years, you've looked like someone carrying the weight of the world. Now, you look like someone with hope." During their 3rd week, George arranged for them to play their first live performance as a group. Not a public concert, but a private showcase for select industry professionals. Robert had invited 20 people: radio programmers, music journalists, booking agents, and representatives from independent record labels. This would be their first test outside the protective environment of the studio. The performance was scheduled for a Friday evening at a small private venue in East Nashville called The Listening Room. The space held about 50 people, with tables arranged cabaret style facing a modest stage. It was intimate, focused, the kind of environment where authenticity mattered more than production value. Tyler, Jessica, and Daniel spent the week before the showcase rehearsing relentlessly. They had decided to perform 5 songs: Second Chance, Highway Prayers, Borrowed Time, a cover of Dolly Parton's Wildflowers that showcased Jessica's violin, and a new song called Nashville Nocturne that they had written specifically for this performance. Nashville Nocturne was their most ambitious composition yet, a 7-minute piece that moved through multiple sections, tempo changes, and emotional territories. The song was essentially a love letter to the city that had both welcomed and challenged them, exploring the contradiction of a place where dreams came to thrive and die simultaneously. Tyler sang the verses. Jessica contributed a haunting, wordless vocal harmony during the bridge, and Daniel's drumming evolved from sparse and contemplative to urgent and driving as the song built toward its climax. The night of the showcase, they arrived 2 hours early for sound check. The venue was empty except for the sound technician, a laconic man named Marcus, who had worked with everyone from Johnny Cash to Jack White. He listened to their sound check attentively, making subtle adjustments to the mix, ensuring their balance was perfect. "You're tight," Marcus observed after they ran through Second Chance. "How long you been playing together?" "About 3 weeks," Tyler admitted. Marcus raised his eyebrows. "You're either lying or you've got something special. Most bands take 6 months to develop that kind of chemistry." As showtime approached, Tyler felt his nerves intensify. This wasn't like playing subway stations where anonymity provided protection. These industry professionals would be evaluating them critically, deciding whether they represented worthwhile investments of time and resources. Everything they had worked toward over the past 3 weeks would be judged in the next 90 minutes. Jessica paced backstage, her violin clutched in both hands. "What if we freeze? What if we're terrible?" "Then we'll be terrible together," Daniel said with surprising calm. "But we won't be. We've practiced too much, worked too hard. We're ready for this." George appeared backstage 15 minutes before they were scheduled to perform. He looked at each of them seriously, then said something Tyler would remember for the rest of his life. "I've been in this business for 40 years. I've played shows for 5 people and shows for 50,000. I've had performances where everything went wrong and performances where everything clicked perfectly. And I've learned something that took me too long to understand. The audience doesn't remember perfect. They remember real. So don't go out there trying to be perfect. Go out there and be real. Play the music you've been creating. Tell the truth you've been discovering. And trust that it will be enough." At 8 p.m. sharp, Robert walked onto the small stage to introduce them. The audience, 20 industry professionals plus George, Robert, Linda, and a handful of staff, fell silent. 3 weeks ago, Robert began, George Strait was passing through a Nashville subway station when he witnessed something remarkable. 3 talented musicians who had never played together creating spontaneous magic. Tonight, after intensive mentorship and collaboration, you're going to hear what happens when raw talent meets focused development. Please welcome Tyler Bennett, Jessica Browning, and Daniel Hayes. The Second Chance Project. They walked onto stage to polite applause. Tyler adjusted his guitar strap. Jessica positioned her violin. Daniel settled behind the drum kit. For a moment, they looked at each other, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. Then Tyler began the opening chords of Second Chance, and everything else fell away. The performance was far from perfect. Tyler's voice cracked during the second verse of Highway Prayers. Jessica's bow squeaked during a transition in Borrowed Time. Daniel rushed the tempo slightly during one section of Nashville Nocturne. But these imperfections somehow enhanced rather than detracted from the performance, making it feel more human, more honest. What the audience responded to wasn't technical perfection, it was authenticity. These 3 people on stage weren't trying to impress or conform to expectations. They were simply sharing music that meant something to them, telling stories they needed to tell, creating sounds that emerged from genuine collaboration rather than calculated commercial strategy. During Nashville Nocturne, something magical happened. The song built to its climax, all 3 instruments driving forward with intensity, and suddenly Tyler deviated from the practiced arrangement. He extended the guitar solo, improvising phrases they hadn't rehearsed. Jessica instantly responded, her violin weaving counter-melodies around his exploration. Daniel adjusted his rhythm, providing foundation while adding fills that pushed the energy higher. They were improvising in real time, communicating through pure musical instinct, each responding to the others with split-second decisions that somehow cohered into unified expression. When they finally brought the song to its conclusion, the audience was silent for 2 beats before erupting into genuine, enthusiastic applause. Tyler, Jessica, and Daniel stood on stage, slightly stunned by what had just happened. They had transcended their preparation and entered that rare space where performance becomes discovery. They hadn't just played music, they had created it in the moment, collaboratively, fearlessly. After the final song, a stripped-down acoustic version of Second Chance that returned them to the emotional core of their journey, they left the stage to sustained applause. Backstage, they collapsed onto couches, adrenaline and exhaustion mixing in their bloodstreams. "Did that actually just happen?" Jessica asked, the question that had become their refrain. "That was incredible," Daniel said, his hands still trembling slightly. "That last song, when we just went off script." "I know," Tyler interrupted. "I don't even know what I was playing. It just happened." George appeared, his smile wide and genuine. "That, right there, that's what separates good musicians from great ones. Good musicians play what they practiced. Great musicians use practice as foundation, but aren't afraid to fly when the moment demands it." Robert followed, his tablet already in hand. 5 people asked for your contact information before the applause ended. 3 want to discuss booking options. 2 want to talk about recording contracts. You just went from unknown to interesting in 90 minutes. The industry professionals filtered backstage over the next hour, offering congratulations and business cards. A radio programmer from one of Nashville's prominent country stations expressed interest in playing their demo once it was complete. A booking agent who worked with major venues asked about their availability for summer festivals. A journalist from Rolling Stone's country music section wanted to interview them for a piece about emerging artists. Most significantly, a representative from Big Machine Label Group, one of Nashville's most successful independent labels, asked to schedule a meeting to discuss potential partnership opportunities. The conversation was preliminary, no commitments made on either side, but the interest was genuine and significant. Tyler, Jessica, and Daniel handled the attention with surprising composure, remembering George's advice to be professional, gracious, and non-committal until they had time to process opportunities carefully. They collected business cards, promised to follow up, and deflected specific questions about future plans with polite vagueness. When the venue finally cleared around midnight, the 5 of them, Tyler, Jessica, Daniel, George, and Robert, sat at one of the cabaret tables, drinking beer and decompressing from the evening's intensity. "So what happens now?" Tyler asked, the question that had been building all evening. "Now we finish the month as planned," George said firmly. "You've got 1 more week under our agreement. We use that week to complete your demo EP, finalize your sound, and prepare you for whatever comes next. Then you'll have decisions to make about representation, recording contracts, touring, all the business elements of a music career." Robert leaned forward. "But let's be clear about something. The interest you generated tonight is real, but it's also preliminary. Industry people express interest constantly. It's what comes after interest that matters. You need to complete a professional quality recording that proves tonight wasn't a fluke. You need to develop a sustainable performance repertoire. You need to build an audience beyond that viral video. Interest is just the first step." "What do you think we should do?" Jessica asked. "About the label interest, I mean." George took a long drink of his beer before answering. "My honest advice? Don't sign anything quickly. Labels can provide resources and distribution, but they also take control and ownership in exchange. In the modern music industry, independent artists have more options than ever before. You could release music independently, build your audience organically, and maintain creative control. Or you could partner with a label that shares your vision and provides support without demanding you compromise your sound. The point is, Robert added, you now have options. 3 weeks ago, you were playing subway stations hoping someone would drop $1 in your case. Tonight, legitimate industry professionals are interested in your music. That's significant progress. But it's only progress, not arrival. They talked for another hour about practicalities and possibilities, about the final week's schedule, and what they needed to accomplish before their month together concluded. But eventually, exhaustion won, and they prepared to leave. As they stood in the parking lot, saying goodnight, George pulled them aside one more time. "I'm proud of you," he said simply. "All 3 of you. You took this opportunity seriously, worked harder than I expected, and developed faster than I anticipated. Whatever happens next, whether you become stars or have modest careers or eventually return to other pursuits, you've proven something important. You've proven you have real talent and genuine dedication. That's not nothing. That's actually everything." Tyler felt his throat tighten with emotion. These words from George Strait, a legend who had sold over 100 million records, who had defined an era of country music, meant more than any recording contract could. This was validation from someone who understood exactly how difficult and unlikely their journey had been. "Thank you," Tyler managed, "for taking a chance on us, for believing we were worth your time." "You were always worth the time," George said. "I just helped you see what was already there." They drove home separately, each processing the evening in their own way. Tyler called his sister Emma, who answered despite the late hour. "How did it go?" she asked immediately. I think my life just changed," Tyler said, his voice breaking slightly. "I think everything just changed." Jessica sat in her parked car outside her apartment for 20 minutes, too overwhelmed to move. She thought about her grandmother, who had fled Hungary with only her violin, who had built a life in America through music and determination. Tonight, playing on that stage, Jessica had felt connected to that legacy in ways she hadn't since her grandmother's death 5 years ago. She wasn't just pursuing music. She was honoring family history, keeping faith with the sacrifices that had made her life possible. Daniel arrived home to find his mother still awake, sitting in her wheelchair by the window despite the late hour. When she saw his face, she started crying before he could speak. "You did it," Patricia said through her tears. "I can see it in your eyes. You did it." "We did it, Mom," Daniel corrected, crossing the room to embrace her carefully. "You gave me the courage to try. This is as much yours as mine." They sat together in the quiet apartment, mother and son, both understanding that something fundamental had shifted. The future remained uncertain, success was far from guaranteed, but possibility had replaced resignation. Hope had replaced despair. And sometimes, that's all anyone needs to keep moving forward. The knowledge that possibilities exist, that efforts matter, that dreams sometimes actually do come true. The final week of their mentorship with George Strait arrived with both anticipation and melancholy. Tyler, Jessica, and Daniel knew their time in this protective, intensive environment was limited. Soon, they would need to navigate the music industry on their own, making decisions that would shape their careers and lives. George and Robert had scheduled every hour of the final week with purpose. They would complete recording their 5-song demo EP, shoot promotional photographs and video content, have business meetings with potential managers and booking agents, and receive intensive education about industry contracts, revenue streams, and the practical realities of sustainable music careers. Monday morning began with a business education session that Robert led in the studio's conference room. He displayed financial spreadsheets and industry data, walking them through the economic realities few musicians understood until too late. "Let's talk about money," Robert said bluntly. "Because talent doesn't mean anything if you can't sustain yourself financially." The average successful touring musician earns about $60,000 per year. Not poverty, but not wealth. Most of that comes from live performances, merchandise, and licensing rather than streaming or sales. You need to understand these economics before making career decisions. He showed them breakdown after breakdown, how recording costs worked, what percentages booking agents and managers typically took, how streaming payments were calculated, depressingly little per play, and why merchandise often represented the difference between breaking even and actually making a living. "If you sign with a major label," Robert explained, "they'll front costs for recording, promotion, and distribution. But they'll also take 80 to 90% of revenues until they recoup those costs, plus ongoing percentages afterward. Independent release means you keep more revenue, but shoulder all costs and risks yourself. Neither option is inherently better. It depends on your specific situation and goals." Jessica took detailed notes, her teaching background making her naturally organized about absorbing information. Tyler asked questions constantly, his analytical mind, trained through years of medical school, dissecting the numbers to understand underlying systems. Daniel listened intently, occasionally interjecting questions about specific scenarios that related to his mother's medical expenses. By lunch, their heads were spinning with information about publishing rights, mechanical licenses, performance royalties, and the dozen other ways music generated revenue in the modern industry. It was overwhelming but necessary. George and Robert were ensuring they couldn't be exploited by predatory contracts or bad business decisions. The afternoon session returned to music, focusing on completing the final recording of their demo EP. They had 5 songs tracked, but Linda needed to handle mixing and mastering, the technical process of balancing levels, adjusting frequencies, and ensuring the recordings translated well across different playback systems. "Mixing is where recordings become professional or remain amateur," Linda explained, showing them the complex mixing board with its hundreds of knobs, sliders, and controls. "I'm going to walk you through the process so you understand what's happening to your music." She played them the raw recording of "Second Chance," then began making adjustments, bringing Tyler's vocal forward, adding subtle reverb to Jessica's violin, tightening Daniel's drum sound, creating space in the frequency spectrum for each instrument to exist without competing. The transformation was remarkable. The song they had written and performed remained fundamentally the same, but Linda's technical expertise revealed dimensions they hadn't known existed. By Tuesday evening, they had a complete, professionally mixed demo EP. 5 songs, 22 minutes of music, that represented 3 weeks of intensive creative development. Robert uploaded the tracks to a private streaming platform and sent links to select industry contacts, generating immediate positive responses. Wednesday brought another showcase performance, this time at the Bluebird Cafe, where their journey had begun 3 weeks earlier. Amy Patterson had arranged for them to play during a songwriter's round, a Nashville tradition where artists sat in a circle, taking turns performing songs and sharing stories about their creative process. They performed alongside established Nashville songwriters, some with decades of experience and cuts on major albums. Being in that company was humbling, but also affirming. They held their own, their songs and performances generating genuine appreciation from both the audience and their fellow performers. An older songwriter named William Crawford approached them afterward. "You kids got something special," he said in his weathered Texas drawl. "I've been writing songs in this town for 38 years, and I can tell when a group has real chemistry versus manufactured collaboration. Y'all got the real thing. Don't let the industry polish that away." Thursday was dedicated to visual content, professional photography and video recording that would become essential for promotion and social media. A photographer named Rachel Kim, who had shot album covers for major country artists, spent hours capturing images of them individually and together in the studio and around Nashville's iconic locations. "Your visual identity matters almost as much as your sound," Rachel explained as she positioned them on a rooftop overlooking downtown Nashville. "People connect to stories and faces, not just voices. These images tell the story of who you are. Young artists hustling in Music City, authentic and unpolished but dedicated to their craft." Friday arrived, the final scheduled day of their mentorship. George had arranged one last surprise, a recording session with a full band. He had hired session musicians, bass player, pedal steel guitar, backing vocalists to record expanded versions of their songs, showing them what their music could become with additional instrumentation. Hearing Second Chance with a full band was revelatory. The additional instruments filled out the sound without overwhelming their core identity. The bass added groove and foundation. The pedal steel guitar contributed emotional nuance during instrumental sections. The backing vocals created depth and dimension during choruses. "This is one possible direction," George explained. "You could remain a trio and maintain that intimate, stripped-down sound. Or you could expand with additional musicians, creating fuller arrangements for larger venues. Neither choice is right or wrong. They're just different artistic directions with different practical implications." As the session concluded and the hired musicians packed their equipment, Tyler, Jessica, and Daniel stood together in the control room, listening to the final playback of their expanded recording. 29 days ago, they had been strangers playing separately in a subway station. Now they had a completed demo EP, industry contacts, potential opportunities, and most importantly, a clear sense of who they were as musicians and collaborators. George entered the control room carrying a small box. "I have something for each of you," he said, handing them individual envelopes. "Open them together." They opened the envelopes simultaneously. Inside each was a check, $3,000 per person, beyond the agreed-upon stipend. "That's a bonus," George explained. "You exceeded expectations at every turn. You worked harder, developed faster, and created better music than I anticipated. That bonus represents my investment in your future. Use it wisely. New equipment, living expenses while you figure out next steps, emergency fund. Whatever makes sense for your situation." Tyler felt tears forming. $3,000 wasn't a fortune, but combined with the stipend, it represented more financial security than he had known in years. Jessica was openly crying, overwhelmed by generosity she hadn't expected and couldn't fully process. Daniel stood silent, clearly struggling to maintain composure. "There's one more thing," Robert said, pulling out official-looking documents. "George and I would like to continue working with you beyond this month. Not as your managers, we're not taking on new management clients, but as advisors. We'll help you navigate industry decisions, introduce you to the right people, and provide guidance as you build your careers. No contracts, no obligations, no percentages. Just mentorship that continues as long as you want it, and we have time to provide it." "Why?" Jessica asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why would you do this for us?" George's expression was gentle but serious. "Because someone did it for me once, and I'm still paying that debt forward because I believe in your talent and your work ethic, and because," he paused, choosing his words carefully, "because in 40 years in this business, I've learned that success isn't just about individual achievement. It's about lifting up people who deserve chances they might not otherwise get. You three deserve this chance." They spent their final evening together at a restaurant George had chosen, a quiet Italian place in Green Hills, away from the tourist crowds of downtown Nashville. Over dinner, they talked not about music or business, but about life, about their families, their dreams beyond music, their fears and hopes for uncertain futures. George told stories about his early years in Texas, the humiliations and disappointments that had preceded success, the moments when he had almost given up. "The music industry will break your heart regularly," he said. "You need to decide whether you love music enough to keep going when it does. That's not about talent. It's about character and dedication." As dinner concluded and they prepared to leave, knowing this marked the formal end of their mentorship month, Tyler stood to make a toast. "A month ago, I was playing subway stations wondering if I'd made a terrible mistake leaving medical school. Jessica was grieving the teaching career she'd lost. Daniel was working himself to exhaustion, trying to care for his mother while pursuing music with makeshift equipment. We were separate, struggling, uncertain." He raised his glass. "George, Robert, Linda, you didn't just teach us about music. You showed us what's possible when someone believes in you, when talent gets matched with opportunity, when hard work receives guidance. You gave us more than skills or industry contacts. You gave us a second chance at our dreams. Whatever happens next, whether we become stars or have modest careers, we'll remember this month forever. Thank you doesn't begin to cover it, but thank you." They clinked glasses, emotions running high, understanding that endings and beginnings are often the same moment viewed from different perspectives. The month was ending, but whatever came next was just beginning. Later that night, Tyler, Jessica, and Daniel met at a late-night diner in East Nashville. Neutral territory, a place they had discovered during the month's chaotic schedule. They ordered coffee and pie and sat in a corner booth, finally alone together to process everything that had happened. "So, what do we do now?" Daniel asked, the question that had been hovering over them all evening. "I think we keep going," Tyler said. "We've got a demo EP, industry contacts, and momentum from that showcase. We keep writing, keep performing, keep building." "But practically," Jessica pressed, "what does that look like? Do we try to book gigs? Do we pursue the label interest? Do we stay in Nashville? Or try to tour?" They talked for hours, mapping out possible paths forward. Eventually, they made several decisions. They would stay together as a group. The Second Chance project would continue beyond the mentorship. They would pursue performance opportunities in Nashville and surrounding cities, building live experience and audience. They would release their demo EP independently through digital platforms, maintaining creative control while testing market response. They would meet twice weekly to write new material, continuing to develop their sound and repertoire. Most importantly, they would support each other through whatever challenges came next. This wasn't just about music anymore. It was about friendship, about loyalty, about three people who had been brought together by circumstance and chose to stay together through intention. As they left the diner near 2 a.m., standing in the parking lot under Nashville's neon glow, Tyler voiced what they were all feeling. "A month ago, we were strangers. Now I can't imagine doing this without you two. Whatever happens, we face it together." "Together," Jessica agreed. "Together," Daniel echoed. They went home to separate apartments, separate lives. but connected now by shared experience and common purpose. The month with George Strait had ended, but their journey was just beginning. And somewhere in Nashville, in a city built on songs and dreams, three musicians prepared to discover whether second chances actually led somewhere, or if they were just beautiful detours on the way to inevitable disappointments. Only time would tell. But for now, in this moment, hope felt like enough. 3 months after their mentorship with George Strait ended, Tyler Bennett, Jessica Browning, and Daniel Hayes were learning the unglamorous reality of building a music career from the ground up. The initial euphoria had given way to the grinding daily work of turning potential into actual success. They had officially formed an LLC, Second Chance Music, handling the legal and financial framework necessary to operate as a professional entity. Robert had connected them with an entertainment attorney who worked pro bono to establish their business structure, ensuring they were protected as they navigated industry complexities. Their demo EP, which they had titled Subway Sessions, as a nod to their origin story, had been released independently on Spotify, Apple Music, and other streaming platforms. The initial response was modest. A few thousand streams in the first week, driven primarily by the audience that had discovered them through the viral Subway video and subsequent social media posts. But modest didn't pay bills. The stipend from George had run out. The bonus had been carefully allocated to equipment upgrades. A proper drum kit for Daniel, a quality amplifier for Tyler, and professional-grade recording equipment that allowed them to produce demos at home rather than paying studio rates. But instruments didn't generate income. They just enabled the work that hopefully would. Tyler had picked up teaching guitar lessons 3 afternoons per week at a local music store, earning enough to cover his share of rent and basic expenses. It wasn't glamorous, but teaching forced him to articulate musical concepts clearly, which inadvertently made him a better songwriter and performer. Jessica had found part-time work scoring music for a small video production company that created content for corporate clients. The work was tedious, background music for training videos and promotional materials, but it paid reasonably well and kept her composition skills sharp. Plus, the flexible schedule allowed her to prioritize performances and writing sessions with Tyler and Daniel. Daniel had kept his warehouse position at reduced hours, working 3 nights per week instead of 5. The income combined with gig earnings was barely enough to cover his mother's medical expenses and basic living costs, but it was sustainable in a way his previous schedule hadn't been. Patricia's condition had stabilized somewhat, not improved, but not actively worsening, giving Daniel cautious hope that the current arrangement might actually work long-term. They had booked 17 performances over the 3 months, a mix of open mic nights, songwriter rounds, small venue showcases, and private events. None paid particularly well. Their best night had been $300 split 3 ways for a corporate event. But each performance built their reputation and refined their live show. The real breakthrough came in mid-February when Rachel Kim, the photographer who had shot their promotional images, mentioned them to a friend who managed booking for the Live on the Green Festival series. This annual free concert series in Nashville attracted thousands of attendees and featured both established acts and emerging artists. Tyler received the email on a Wednesday afternoon while teaching a particularly difficult student how to play barre chords. His phone buzzed with a message from an address he didn't recognize. He waited until after the lesson to check it, assuming it was spam. Subject: Performance Opportunity. Live on the Green, Mr. Bennett. My name is Jennifer Walsh, Booking Coordinator for Live on the Green. Your group was recommended to me by Rachel Kim, who showed me your promotional materials and demo EP. I'd like to discuss the possibility of including Second Chance Project in our May lineup as part of our Emerging Artist Showcase. The show would be outdoors at Public Square Park. Expected attendance 8,000 to 10,000 people. You'd perform a 45-minute set in the early evening slot. Full professional sound and lighting provided. While we can't offer performance fees for emerging artist slots, this represents significant exposure and industry credibility. Please let me know if you're interested in discussing further. Best regards, Jennifer Walsh. Tyler read the email 3 times to ensure he wasn't misunderstanding. 8 to 10,000 people. Professional production. Live on the Green was a legitimate, respected event. Artists who played this festival got noticed. He immediately called Jessica, who answered on the first ring. Tyler, I'm in the middle of scoring a particularly annoying pharmaceutical training video, so this better be good. Live on the Green wants us to perform. Silence. Then, are you serious? Check your email. I'm forwarding it now. He heard her computer keyboard clicking, then a sharp intake of breath. Oh my God. Tyler, this is real. This is actually real. They conference called Daniel, who was sleeping before his warehouse shift. He answered groggily, but became immediately alert when they explained the situation. How soon do we need to respond? Daniel asked practically. I'm responding right now, Tyler said, already typing on his phone. I'm saying yes before she changes her mind or realizes she meant to email someone else. Within an hour, they had confirmed their interest and scheduled a meeting with Jennifer Walsh for the following week. The performance was scheduled for May 15th, 3 months away, giving them time to prepare, but not so much time that the opportunity felt distant or theoretical. The next 3 months became a focused sprint toward that single performance. They understood intuitively that this was their moment, the chance to prove they were more than just a viral video or a feel-good story about struggling musicians getting a break. This was where they would demonstrate they had real talent, a developed sound, and the ability to connect with large audiences. George and Robert, true to their word about ongoing mentorship, checked in regularly. When they learned about the Live on the Green opportunity, George called Tyler directly. This is your shot, George said without preamble. 45 minutes in front of 10,000 people. You nail this performance, and industry doors start opening. You're mediocre, and you remain an interesting footnote. What's your plan? Tyler, Jessica, and Daniel met that evening to develop their strategy. They needed to expand their repertoire from 5 songs to enough material for a full 45-minute set. That meant writing new songs, developing cover versions that showcase their unique sound, and creating a performance flow that would hold audience attention from start to finish. They increased their writing sessions from twice weekly to 4 times per week, dedicating every Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, and Sunday evening to collaborative creation. Tyler's small apartment became their unofficial headquarters, his living room perpetually filled with instruments, notebooks, recording equipment, and coffee cups. Writing new material proved both exhilarating and frustrating. Some songs came easily. City Limits emerged fully formed during a single 3-hour session, a driving anthem about the relationship between small-town origins and big-city dreams. Others required weeks of revision and refinement. Waiting Room went through 7 complete rewrites before they found the emotional truth at its core. They studied performances by artists they admired, analyzing stage presence, set list construction, and audience engagement techniques. They watched videos of Bruce Springsteen's marathon concerts, noting how he built energy gradually rather than starting at maximum intensity. They studied Alison Krauss's stage banter, learning how she created intimacy even in large venues. They analyzed The Killer's festival performances, understanding how to project energy across massive outdoor spaces. George arranged for them to use a rehearsal space with professional stage dimensions and sound equipment allowing them to practice with the spatial dynamics of a real performance. Linda Morrison came to several rehearsals, offering technical advice about mic technique, stage volume, and how to hear themselves through monitors in outdoor environments where sound behaved differently than in controlled studio settings. Outdoor festivals are chaos, Linda warned. You're competing with ambient noise, weather conditions, and audience members who are there for the headliner, but might not know who you are. You need to grab attention in the first 30 seconds and hold it through sheer force of performance quality and authenticity. They worked on their visual presentation, coordinating outfits that looked intentional without seeming costumey, choreographing simple movements that created visual interest without distracting from the music, and developing between-song banter that revealed their personalities without wasting precious performance time. Jessica initially resisted stage banter, uncomfortable with public speaking after years of classroom teaching where she controlled the environment. But Tyler convinced her that sharing brief personal stories between songs created connection with audiences who needed to understand why these songs mattered. People don't just want to hear music, Tyler argued during a rehearsal. They want to feel connected to the musicians making it. When you tell that story about your grandmother's violin, audiences understand the emotional stakes. It transforms you from a performer into a person they can relate to and root for. Daniel's challenge was different. His natural showmanship sometimes overwhelmed the more subdued moments. He had to learn restraint, to understand that not every song needed maximum energy, that dynamics created emotional impact through contrast. Think of a performance like a conversation, George advised during one of their check-in calls. If you're shouting the whole time, people stop listening. You need quiet moments that make the loud ones matter more. That's how you take audiences on a journey, rather than just hitting them with sound for 45 minutes. As May 15th approached, they had developed a 12-song set list that balanced original material with strategically chosen covers. They would open with City Limits, establishing energy immediately. Early songs included crowd-friendly material designed to win over unfamiliar audiences. Mid-set featured their most emotionally vulnerable songs, including Borrowed Time and a new composition called Letters Home about family relationships strained by difficult choices. They would build toward a climactic finale with an extended version of Nashville Nocturne that showcased their improvisational chemistry. 2 weeks before the performance, Tyler's father called, the first time they had spoken in 4 months. The conversation started awkwardly, years of disappointment and judgment hanging between them. "Your sister sent me a link to that video from the subway," his father said. "The one that got all those views." "Yeah?" Tyler responded carefully, unsure where this was going. "You're good," his father admitted. "I didn't want to see it, but Emma kept insisting. So I finally watched." "You're actually good, Tyler. That wasn't just kids fooling around. That was real music." Tyler felt his throat tighten. "Thanks, Dad. That means a lot. I'm still not sure you made the right choice leaving medical school," his father continued, his voice carrying familiar tension. "But I'm starting to understand why you made it. Your mother and we're going to come to that festival thing in Nashville. If you want us there, I mean." "Of course I want you there," Tyler said immediately, surprised by how much he meant it. "Dad, I'd really like that." After hanging up, Tyler sat on his apartment balcony for a long time, guitar in lap, not playing, just thinking. His father's approval had mattered more than he had admitted to himself. The wound of his father's disappointment had been driving him forward more than he had realized. Proving himself became motivation for every song written, every performance given, every choice made. Now, with that approval tentatively offered, something loosened in Tyler's chest. He didn't need his father's validation to justify his choices, but receiving it felt like setting down weight he hadn't known he was carrying. Jessica's journey toward the performance involved reconciliation of a different kind. Not with family, but with herself. 3 months of steady work had stabilized her financial situation. She had paid off her credit card debt, caught up on all bills, and even begun rebuilding savings. The constant anxiety that had dominated her life for a year had receded, replaced by challenging but sustainable reality. She started visiting her former school, Hamilton Middle, not to teach, but to share her journey with current students. The new administration, different from the one that had eliminated the music program, welcomed her presentations about pursuing creative careers despite obstacles and setbacks. "I'm not here to tell you that following your dreams is easy," Jessica told a classroom of 8th graders during one visit. "It's not. It's terrifying and often financially unstable. But I'm here to tell you that giving up on your dreams is worse. Living safely but without purpose, that's a slow death of the soul. So find what you love and figure out how to build a life around it, even if the path isn't straight or obvious." Afterward, a shy girl approached with a violin case. "I want to quit," the girl admitted. "My parents say musicians don't make money, and I should focus on practical subjects." Jessica knelt down to the girl's eye level. "Can I show you something?" She pulled out her phone and showed the girl photos from their studio sessions with George Strait, screenshots of streaming numbers, and the email from Live on the Green. "3 months ago, I was playing violin in subway stations, wondering if I'd made a terrible mistake pursuing music. Now I'm performing at a major festival because I didn't give up. Your parents love you and want you to be secure. That's legitimate. But security without fulfillment is just comfortable unhappiness. Keep playing. You're too young to make permanent decisions. But don't give up yet. Give yourself a real chance before deciding it can't work." The girl hugged her, tears streaming down her face. Jessica drove home that evening, feeling like she had reclaimed a piece of her identity she thought was lost forever. She wasn't just a performer anymore. She was a teacher again, but teaching through example rather than curriculum. Daniel's preparation for the festival was complicated by his mother's declining health. In mid-April, Patricia suffered a significant MS flare-up, her mobility decreasing dramatically. She required increased care, more frequent medical appointments, and adjustments to her medication regimen. Daniel found himself pulled between his commitment to the band and his responsibility to his mother. One evening, after a particularly difficult day where Patricia had fallen trying to transfer from wheelchair to bed, Daniel called Tyler and Jessica. "I don't know if I can do the festival," he said, his voice heavy with exhaustion and guilt. "My mom needs more help. I can't abandon her for rehearsals and performances when she's struggling this much." They showed up at his apartment 30 minutes later. Patricia was resting in her bedroom, and Tyler and Jessica sat with Daniel at the kitchen table. "What if we helped?" Jessica suggested. "Not with everything, but with specific things that would free up some of your time." "I can't ask you to do that," Daniel protested. "You're not asking, we're offering," Tyler said firmly. "We're not just a band, Daniel. We're friends. Friends show up for each other beyond music." They worked out a schedule where Tyler and Jessica would each spend one afternoon per week at Patricia's apartment, handling grocery shopping, light housework, and providing companionship so Daniel could focus on work and music without constant worry. It wasn't a complete solution, but it provided breathing room Daniel desperately needed. Patricia was initially resistant, uncomfortable accepting help from relative strangers. But after Jessica spent an afternoon with her, talking about music, sharing stories about her own grandmother, simply providing adult conversation that Patricia rarely got anymore, she understood these young people genuinely cared about her son and, by extension, about her. "You're good for him," Patricia told Jessica during their second afternoon together. Danny's been carrying the world on his shoulders for 3 years. Seeing him with you and Tyler, seeing him laugh and create and hope again, that's been better medicine than anything doctors have prescribed. The week before the festival, George and Robert came to their final dress rehearsal at the professional rehearsal space. The entire 45-minute set performed as it would be at the actual event, including stage banter and all transitions. When they finished, George was quiet for a long moment. Then he smiled, that warm, genuine smile that had become familiar over the past 5 months. "You're ready," he said simply. "More than ready. You're going to surprise people, including yourselves." The night before the performance, Tyler, Jessica, and Daniel met at their usual late-night diner, a tradition that had become their ritual before important events. They ordered their usual coffee and pie and sat in their customary corner booth. "Tomorrow, 10,000 people are going to watch us perform," Jessica said, the reality finally hitting. "How did we get here? We got here because a country music legend took a subway and decided to stop and listen," Tyler said. "And because we were brave enough to take the chance he offered. And because we worked our asses off every single day since." "What if we fail?" Daniel asked quietly. "What if we get out there and freeze? Or the sound is terrible, or people don't respond?" "Then we fail in front of 10,000 people," Tyler said pragmatically. "And then we figure out what comes next. But honestly, I don't think we're going to fail. I think we're going to be incredible. Not perfect, but real." And that's what people respond to. They sat together in comfortable silence. 3 people who had been strangers 7 months ago, now bound by shared experience, mutual support, and common purpose. Whatever happened tomorrow, they would face it together. May 15th arrived with perfect weather. 72 degrees, clear blue skies, gentle breeze. Public Square Park in downtown Nashville had been transformed into a concert venue, with a massive main stage, professional sound and lighting systems, food vendors, and merchandise areas. By late afternoon, when the Second Chance Project was scheduled to perform, the park was filling with people. Tyler's parents had driven down from their home in East Tennessee, arriving early to secure a good viewing position. They stood awkwardly at first, clearly uncomfortable in the crowd of younger, cooler music fans. But as the park filled and energy built, they relaxed slightly, allowing themselves to be caught up in the anticipation. Jessica's extended family had come, her aunt and uncle from Kentucky, her 2 younger cousins, and several of her former students from Hamilton Middle School, including the girl with the violin, who now wore a homemade Second Chance Project t-shirt. Daniel's mother had insisted on attending despite her declining mobility. They had arranged for a medical transport service to bring her in a wheelchair to an accessible viewing area near the stage. Patricia Hayes sat wrapped in blankets despite the warm weather, her hands trembling but her eyes bright with fierce pride. Backstage, Tyler, Jessica, and Daniel went through their pre-performance rituals. Tyler paced while running through lyrics, his lips moving silently. Jessica practiced difficult finger passages on her violin, warming up muscles and settling nerves. Daniel sat behind his kit, hitting pads softly, finding the zone of focused relaxation where his best playing emerged. George and Robert appeared backstage, offering final encouragement. "Remember what I told you the first night we worked together," George said. "The audience doesn't remember perfect. They remember real. So go out there and be real. Play the music you've been creating, tell the truth you've been discovering, and trust that it will be enough." At 6:45 p.m., they walked onto the stage to polite but uncertain applause. Most of the audience didn't know who they were, just another emerging artist slot before the headliners. But that was fine. They had 45 minutes to make believers out of skeptics. Tyler stepped to the microphone, guitar slung across his shoulder, and looked out at the massive crowd. For a moment, the scale felt overwhelming. Then he found his parents in the crowd, saw his father's face showing something that looked almost like pride, and everything clicked into focus. "Good evening, Nashville," Tyler said, his voice steady and clear. "We're the Second Chance Project, and 7 months ago, the three of us were strangers playing separately in a subway station, just trying to survive. Then something unexpected happened, and we'd like to share that journey with you tonight through music. This first song is called City Limits, and it's about leaving behind everything familiar to chase something you can't quite name, but know you need to find." Tyler's fingers found the opening chords, and the massive professional sound system carried the music across the park with crystalline clarity. Jessica's violin joined on the second measure, adding harmonic texture. Daniel's drums entered on the downbeat of the first verse, and suddenly they weren't three nervous musicians anymore. They were a band, unified and confident. The first verse cut through the ambient crowd noise, crossed the city limits with nothing but a dream. Rearview mirror full of everything I used to be. Mama said, I'm running, but I call it being free. These roads go on forever, and forever's where I need to be. By the chorus, sections of the crowd were nodding along, drawn in by the honesty of the lyrics and the driving energy of the arrangement. This wasn't polished radio country. It was raw, authentic, lived experience transformed into sound. They moved seamlessly into their second song, Highway Prayers, Tyler sharing a brief story about the long drives that had inspired it. With each song, the crowd's attention intensified. People who had been talking or checking phones stopped and listened. The polite applause after the first song grew more enthusiastic after the second, then genuinely excited after the third. Midway through the set, Jessica stepped forward to tell the story of her grandmother's violin. Her voice was quiet at first, uncertain, but as she spoke about fleeing Hungary with only an instrument and hope, about building a life in America through music and determination, the massive crowd fell silent, hanging on every word. This violin represents 3 generations of women who refused to give up on beauty and art, even when the world told them to be practical, Jessica said, holding up the instrument so the late afternoon sun caught its polished surface. My grandmother played it in Budapest concert halls before the war. My mother played it in church basements after they immigrated, and I played it in subway stations when I thought I'd lost everything. Now, I'm playing it here for all of you, continuing a legacy that music matters, that art matters, that dreams matter even when they're difficult. She began playing Borrowed Time, the emotional piece about Daniel's mother. The violin melody was achingly beautiful, made more poignant by the story she had just shared. When Tyler's voice entered, singing Daniel's words about love and loss and the precious nature of time, several people in the crowd were openly crying. Patricia Hayes, sitting in her wheelchair near the stage, listened to her son's words sung by his friend, accompanied by music they had created together, and wept with pride so fierce it was almost painful. Her illness had stolen so much: mobility, independence, the future she had imagined. But it hadn't stolen this moment, watching her son live his dream on a stage in front of thousands. The set continued building momentum. They performed Letters Home, their new song about family relationships strained by difficult choices. Tyler made eye contact with his father during the bridge, singing directly to him. I know you don't understand the choices that I've made. I know you think I'm throwing my life away, but someday you might see what I've been trying to say. I'd rather fail at what I love than succeed at what I hate. His father's face crumpled slightly, decades of misunderstanding and hurt visible for a moment before he composed himself and nodded. A small gesture, but one that acknowledged receipt of the message. Acceptance, if not full understanding. As they approached the final songs, Tyler addressed the crowd again. "We want to thank someone who made this possible. 7 months ago, George Strait was passing through a Nashville subway station. He could have walked past us like everyone else. Instead, he stopped. He listened. And he gave us a chance we didn't know we needed. George, if you're out there, this one's for you." They launched into a cover of Amarillo by Morning, the George Strait classic that the Texas fans had sung in the subway that fateful November morning. But their version was distinctly their own. Jessica's violin adding Appalachian folk influences, Daniel's drums incorporating subtle jazz rhythms, Tyler's vocal delivery more vulnerable and less polished than the original. They honored the song while making it theirs, the perfect tribute to mentorship and influence without imitation. The crowd responded enthusiastically, many recognizing the song and appreciating the respectful reinterpretation. And somewhere backstage, watching on a monitor, George Strait smiled. For their final song, they performed Nashville Nocturne, the extended 7-minute piece that had been their breakthrough at the industry showcase months ago. They had refined it significantly since then, adding sections, developing dynamics, creating space for extended improvisation during the instrumental bridge. As they reached the improvisation section, something magical happened. The same spontaneous musical communication that had emerged during the showcase returned, amplified by the energy of 10,000 people watching. Tyler's guitar explored melodic territory they hadn't rehearsed. Jessica's violin responded with complementary phrases. Daniel's drumming built intensity organically. They were creating in real time, communicating through pure instinct, 3 individual voices becoming one unified expression. The crowd sensed they were witnessing something special. Not just a performance, but a moment of genuine creation. People who had been casually listening stood up, giving full attention. Phones came out to record, capturing shaky vertical videos that would be shared across social media within minutes. The song built to its climax, all 3 instruments driving forward with escalating intensity, then suddenly dropped to near silence. Just Tyler's quiet guitar and Jessica's ethereal violin, Daniel holding back, creating contrast. They held that fragile moment for 8 measures. The massive crowd utterly silent, 10,000 people holding their breath. Then they exploded back into the full arrangement for the final chorus, every instrument and voice giving everything they had. When they hit the final chord, a sustained note that seemed to hang in the air forever, and cut off in perfect synchronization, the crowd erupted. The applause was thunderous, genuine, the kind of response that can't be manufactured or commanded. People were on their feet, whistling, shouting, demanding more. Tyler, Jessica, and Daniel stood on stage, slightly stunned, not quite believing what had just happened. Tyler stepped back to the microphone. "Thank you, Nashville. You've been incredible. We're the Second Chance Project, and we just want you to remember one thing. It's never too late to chase your dreams. We're living proof of that. Thank you for letting us share this moment with you." They left the stage to sustained applause, walking into the wings where George and Robert waited. George pulled each of them into quick embraces. "That was extraordinary," George said simply. "You did everything right. More importantly, you did everything honest. That audience wasn't just entertained. They were moved. That's the difference between performers and artists. You're artists." Robert was already on his phone, monitoring social media. The response is exploding online. Videos are being shared everywhere. People are asking who you are, where they can hear more music. This is exactly the kind of organic buzz that can't be bought. Jennifer Walsh, the festival organizer, appeared with several other venue representatives. "That was spectacular," she said enthusiastically. "We're already getting requests for you to appear at other events. I have at least 5 booking inquiries just from people who were watching backstage. You 3 are going to be busy." Over the next hour, as the festival continued with other performers, Tyler, Jessica, and Daniel were approached by industry professionals they hadn't met before. A booking agent from CAA, one of the largest talent agencies in the world, handed Tyler a card and asked to schedule a meeting. A representative from Sony Music Nashville expressed interest in discussing recording options. Multiple venue owners from across the Southeast wanted to book them for performances. But the most meaningful moments happened when they finally got to see their families and friends. Tyler's father embraced him tightly, something he hadn't done in years. "I was wrong," his father said simply, "about you throwing your life away. I was wrong, and I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner. You're exactly where you're supposed to be." Jessica's former students mobbed her, all talking at once about how inspiring the performance had been. The girl with the violin, the one who had wanted to quit, held up her instrument case. "I'm not quitting," she announced. "I'm going to be like you." Daniel knelt beside his mother's wheelchair. Patricia's hands were shaking more than usual, but she reached up to cup her son's face with trembling fingers. "Your father would be so proud," she whispered. "I wish he could have stayed long enough to see this. But I saw it, Danny. I saw you shine. I saw you become everything you were meant to be." Daniel rested his forehead against hers, unable to speak through the emotions flooding him. As evening deepened and the festival's headliner took the stage, the 3 members of the Second Chance Project found a quiet spot away from the crowds. They sat on equipment cases backstage, exhausted but exhilarated, processing what had just happened. "So, what now?" Jessica asked, the question that had defined their journey from the beginning. "Now, we figure out how to sustain this," Tyler said practically. "That performance opened doors, but we still have to walk through them. We still have to write more songs, book more shows, build a real career. But we're not alone anymore," Daniel added. 7 months ago, we were individuals struggling separately. Now we have each other. We have mentors. We have momentum. We have a real chance at making this work." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the headliner's distant music, watching festival lights illuminate the Nashville night. 7 months ago, they had been strangers in a subway station. Now they were partners in an uncertain but exhilarating journey. 3 months later, 8 months after their chance meeting in the subway station, the Second Chance Project signed with an independent label that gave them creative control while providing distribution and promotional support. They released their debut album, Underground, in September, the title referencing both their subway origins and the authentic, unpolished sound they refused to compromise. The album debuted at number 7 on the Billboard Country Albums chart and number 42 on the Billboard 200. Not massive commercial success, but respectable enough to prove they were more than just a viral video or feel-good story. More importantly, they were building a sustainable career. They played over 80 shows in the year following Live on the Green, festivals, theaters, clubs, and college campuses across the United States. The audiences weren't massive, typically ranging from 500 to 2,000 people, but they were dedicated, engaged fans who connected with the music and the story. Tyler's father attended a show in Knoxville, bringing several of his physician colleagues. After the performance, watching his son sign autographs and take photos with fans, he pulled Tyler aside. "I spent 30 years as a doctor helping people one patient at a time," he said. "I thought that was the only way to make a meaningful difference. But watching you tonight, Seeing how your music touches people gives them hope and connection. That's healing too. Different from medicine, but just as important. I finally understand why you had to do this. Jessica received an email from Hamilton Middle School's new principal, asking if she would be interested in returning, not as a full-time teacher, but as an artist in residence, visiting monthly to work with students while maintaining her music career. It was the perfect balance, allowing her to continue performing while staying connected to education that had always been part of her identity. Daniel's mother passed away in December, her condition having declined gradually through the fall. It was expected, but still devastating. At her funeral, Daniel played a drum solo, a 7-minute piece he had composed specifically for her, incorporating rhythms from the jazz records his father used to play, the sounds of her laughter and voice captured in recordings, and the steady pulse of a heart that had loved him unconditionally. The entire music community showed up. George and Robert, Linda, venue owners, fellow musicians, and hundreds of fans who had heard Daniel's story through their music. Tyler and Jessica played violin and guitar during the service, performing Borrowed Time acoustically, its lyrics about the precious nature of fleeting moments more poignant than ever. After the funeral, Daniel was quiet for several weeks, going through motions of rehearsals and performances, but clearly struggling. Tyler and Jessica gave him space, but stayed present, showing up at his apartment with food, handling administrative tasks he couldn't focus on, simply being there. One evening, Daniel called them to his apartment. They arrived to find him sitting at his drum kit, the professional set George had helped him purchase months ago. "I wrote something," Daniel said. "For her. I need you to help me finish it." They spent the night creating Midnight Requiem, a song that captured grief's complexity, the simultaneous gratitude for time shared and rage at time stolen, the way loss makes every previous moment precious in retrospect. It was the most emotionally raw song they had ever written, and when they recorded it 3 weeks later, they did it in one take because additional attempts would have been impossible through tears. The song was released as a single in February, accompanied by a music video featuring home video footage of Patricia Hayes and interviews where Daniel talked honestly about caring for a dying parent while pursuing dreams. The video went viral, not for spectacle or shock value, but for honest emotional resonance that touched anyone who had experienced loss or served as caregiver for declining loved ones. Midnight Requiem became their biggest hit, reaching number 12 on the country charts and crossing over to adult contemporary and Americana formats. But more importantly, it connected with people in deep, meaningful ways. Daniel received hundreds of letters and messages from caregivers, from people grieving losses, from anyone who felt seen and understood by his words. One letter came from a hospice nurse in Ohio. "I've been working with dying patients for 15 years, and I've never heard their experience and their family's experience captured so honestly in art. Thank you for putting words and music to what so many of us feel but can't express." 18 months after their subway meeting, the Second Chance Project was invited to perform at the Grand Ole Opry, country music's most prestigious venue and tradition. Playing the Opry meant joining a lineage that stretched back to 1925, performing on the same stage where legends had stood for generations. The night of their Opry debut, Tyler, Jessica, and Daniel stood in the wings waiting to be introduced, looking out at the iconic wooden circle center stage, a piece of the original Ryman Auditorium stage that had been preserved and incorporated into the current venue. "We're really here," Jessica whispered. "From subway platforms to the Grand Ole Opry in a year and a half. Your grandmother would be proud," Tyler said, squeezing her hand. "My mother's here," Daniel added quietly. "I feel her here. She's watching." The announcer's voice boomed through the theater. "Ladies and gentlemen, Please welcome to the Grand Ole Opry stage, for the very first time, the Second Chance Project. They walked onto the stage to enthusiastic applause, taking their positions around that sacred wooden circle. George Strait was in the audience. He had rearranged his schedule specifically to be present for their debut. When Tyler spotted him and nodded, George nodded back. A simple gesture that communicated pride, respect, and recognition that a journey begun in a subway station had arrived at a destination neither could have fully predicted. They performed 5 songs that night, including Second Chance, Borrowed Time, and Midnight Requiem. But they closed with a new song they had written specifically for this moment, The Long Way Home, a meditation on how the most meaningful journeys rarely follow straight lines. The final verse captured their story perfectly. Started in a subway, playing for spare change, thought we'd lost our way, but we were right where we needed to be. Sometimes the long way home is the only way to find yourself. Sometimes second chances are really first chances in disguise. As they took their bows to sustained applause, Tyler looked at Jessica and Daniel, 2 people who had been strangers 18 months ago, now family in every way that mattered. They had started as individuals struggling separately, became collaborators through chance, and transformed into something greater than the sum of their parts through dedication, work, and mutual support. The music industry would continue to be challenging. Success would remain uncertain. Future obstacles would test them in ways they couldn't predict. But standing on the Grand Ole Opry stage, having traveled from subway platforms to country music's most hallowed venue, they had proven something fundamental. Second chances were real. Dreams could actually come true. And sometimes the most unlikely stories had the most beautiful endings. Later that night, after the performance, after the congratulations and photographs and celebrations, the 3 of them sat in the empty Opry Theater with George. The house lights were low, just work lights illuminating the stage and seating. "What do you think happens next?" George asked, the question he had posed so many times throughout their journey. "I think we keep going," Tyler said. "Keep writing, keep performing, keep growing. But now we know it's possible. Now we know we belong here." "You've always belonged here," George said firmly. "I just helped you see what was already true. You had the talent, the work ethic, the chemistry. I just provided opportunity and guidance. Everything you've achieved, you earned yourselves." He stood, preparing to leave, then turned back one more time. "The music business will try to change you. It will pressure you to be more commercial, more predictable, more like whatever's currently selling. Don't let it. The reason people connect with your music is because it's honest and authentic. Protect that at all costs. Success that requires compromising who you are isn't really success. It's just well-compensated mediocrity." After George left, Tyler, Jessica, and Daniel remained in the empty theater, each lost in their own thoughts about the journey that had brought them here and the unknown journey that lay ahead. "You know what I keep thinking about?" Jessica said finally. "That morning in the subway station when we played Amazing Grace together for the first time. We had never rehearsed, never planned it, just somehow found each other musically. That's when I knew this was real. Not the success or the recognition, but the connection between us. That's what made everything else possible." "I think about my mother," Daniel said quietly. "How she told me to be braver than she and my father had been. How she pushed me to take the chance with George, even though she was sick and needed me. She knew what I needed before I did. I wish she could have been here tonight." "She was here," Tyler said with certainty. "I don't believe in a lot of spiritual stuff, but I believe people we love stay with us somehow. She's in every drumbeat you play, Daniel. She's in every song we write about love and sacrifice and the preciousness of time. She's here. They sat together in the historic theater, three musicians who had found each other through chance and stayed together through choice, understanding that their journey was far from over, but grateful for how far they had come. 750 miles away, in a small town in Texas, a group of friends watched their Grand Ole Opry performance on television. They were the same group who had been visiting Nashville that November morning, who had sung Amarillo by Morning to George Strait in a subway station and unknowingly changed the trajectory of three people's lives. "Can you believe that's them?" one woman said, tears streaming down her face. "We were there when it started. We saw the beginning of their story." "We didn't just see it," her husband corrected. "We were part of it. If we hadn't sung to George, he might have just kept walking. We helped start something beautiful." They raised glasses in toast to chance encounters, to music that connects strangers, to the unpredictable ways lives intersect and transform each other. And in Nashville, Tennessee, a city built on songs and dreams, where talent came to thrive or die, where the impossible sometimes became possible through dedication and luck in equal measure, three musicians prepared for whatever came next. Their story had begun in darkness, in an underground subway station where desperate artists played for spare change. It had been illuminated by the kindness of a stranger who remembered his own struggling years and chose to pay forward the help he had once received. Now, standing in the light of country music's most prestigious stage, having traveled from subway platforms to radio playlists, from anonymity to recognition, from individual struggle to collaborative triumph, Tyler Bennett, Jessica Browning, and Daniel Hayes had proven that second chances were real, that dreams could be pursued at any age and from any starting point. The talent combined with work ethic and mentorship could overcome nearly impossible odds. They were the Second Chance Project, not because they had been given a second chance, but because they represented what second chances looked like, when seized with both hands, when pursued with relentless dedication, when valued as the precious gifts they truly were. And as they walked out of the Grand Ole Opry into the Nashville night, instruments in hand, futures uncertain but possibilities endless, they carried with them the most important lesson their journey had taught. The greatest distance any artist travels isn't measured in miles or chart positions or sold-out venues. It's measured in the space between who you were when you started and who you've become through the journey. And by that measure, they had traveled further than most artists travel in entire lifetimes. Their story, which had begun with a chance encounter in a subway station, would continue with countless performances, recordings, and moments yet to be written. But they would face whatever came next together, united by music, friendship, and the shared understanding that sometimes the most beautiful songs emerge from the most unexpected moments. The Second Chance Project had earned their name, their success, and their place in Nashville's musical legacy. And somewhere, watching over them with pride, the spirits of everyone who had believed in them, Patricia Hayes, Jessica's grandmother, Tyler's reconciled father, and countless others who had offered encouragement along the way, smiled, knowing their faith had been justified. The music would continue. The journey would continue. And three musicians who had once been strangers would continue writing the next chapters of their story, one song at a time.